there, YouTube FAM. Welcome back to our podcast, powered by the magic of Jetoff. I'm Lyra, and I'm super to be here with my co-host, the one and only Leah.
Thanks for the intro. Mira, I'm feeling like a superstar today. So, let's get straight to it. I have a funny story to share from our previous podcast recording. We were discussing the best food to try in Turkey, and I got a bit carried away with my love for Turkish delight. I ended up with a mouthful of it and a sugar rush that lasted for hours.
Oh my god, that's hilarious. I'm pretty sure you were bouncing off the walls for the rest of the day. But, seriously, we did have a great time discussing the different cuisines of Turkey. And speaking of food, have you ever tried the Mauritian seafood? It's to die for.
Yes. The seafood in Mauritius is amazing. I had the best fish curry of my life there. But, I have to say, I'm a bit concerned about the sharks in the waters. I don't want to be someone's lunch.
Don't worry, Leo. The sharks in Mauritius are generally harmless to humans. But, I do have to say, I've had some close encounters with them while snorkeling. Let's just say I won't be winning any awards for bravery anytime soon.
I'm sure you'll be just fine. Yeah, but moving on to our topic of the day. We're going to be comparing two amazing countries, Mauritius and Myanmar. We'll be discussing everything from their cultures and histories to their economies and tourist attractions.
That's right. We'll be answering all the questions in your minds, whether you're visiting or even marrying someone from one of these countries. We've got you covered. Our podcast will be a comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions.
Exactly. And to make things even more interesting, we'll be sharing some of our own personal experiences and anecdotes from our travels to these countries. So, stay tuned and get ready for an exciting journey with us.
Before we begin, I just want to say that our podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people at Jetoff AI, who help us make this magic happen every week. And, as always, we want to hear from you. So, please leave your comments and questions below, and we'll do our best to answer them in our next podcast.
That's right. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell, so you don't miss out on any of our future episodes. Thanks for listening, everyone, and let's get started on our journey to Mauritius and Myanmar.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to know about the safety and crime rates in Mauritius and Myanmar. Let's start with Mauritius, shall we? It's known for its beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters. But what about crime?
Yes. Mauritius is indeed a haven for tourists, but crime can be a concern. According to the latest statistics, the overall crime rate in Mauritius is relatively low. However, petty theft and pickpocketing are common in crowded areas and tourist hotspots.
That's true. But what about violent crimes? Are they a major concern in Mauritius?
Fortunately, violent crimes are rare in Mauritius. However, there have been instances of armed robbery and assault, particularly at night. It's essential for tourists to take necessary precautions and stay informed about local conditions.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the police force is quite efficient in maintaining law and order. What about the situation in Myanmar? Leo, how does it compare to Mauritius?
Myanmar is a different story altogether. Crime rates in Myanmar are relatively high, and the situation is often characterized by a lack of trust in the police force. Petty theft and pickpocketing are common, and there have been instances of armed robbery and assault, particularly in major cities like Yangon.
Wow, that's quite a contrast to Mauritius. But what about the cultural factors that shape crime in Myanmar? Is there anything unique about the country's crime dynamics?
Yes. Myanmar's cultural context plays a significant role in shaping crime. The country has a complex history of military rule and ethnic conflicts, which has led to a culture of mistrust and corruption. Additionally, the country's economic development has created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of human trafficking and narcotics.
I see. And what about the role of the police force in Myanmar? Is it effective in maintaining law and order?
Unfortunately, The police force in Myanmar is often seen as corrupt and ineffective. There have been instances of police brutality and human rights abuses, which has eroded trust in the institution. However, there are efforts underway to reform the police force and improve its effectiveness.
That's interesting. And what about the situation in Mauritius? Are there any unique cultural factors that contribute to the country's crime dynamics?
Yes. Mauritius has a unique cultural context that contributes to its crime dynamics. The country has a strong sense of community and social cohesion, which helps to prevent crime. Additionally, the country's economic development has created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of cybercrime and financial fraud.
I see. And what about the role of the police force in Mauritius? Is it effective in maintaining law and order?
Yes. The police force in Mauritius is generally effective in maintaining law and order. The country has a low crime rate, and the police force is well equipped to handle minor crimes. However, there have been instances of police brutality and human rights abuses, which has raised concerns about the institution's effectiveness.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the police forces in both countries are effective in maintaining law and order? Please let us know in the comments.
And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information we've shared about the safety and crime rates in Mauritius and Myanmar. But what about the role of tourism in shaping crime in both countries? Is there anything unique about the relationship between tourism and crime in these countries?
Yes. Tourism can play a significant role in shaping crime in both countries. In Mauritius, tourism has created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of petty theft and pickpocketing. The country's tourism industry is also working to promote safety and security for tourists.
And in Myanmar, tourism has also created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of human trafficking and narcotics. However, the country's tourism industry is also working to promote safety and security for tourists, particularly in areas that are considered safe for travel.
I see. And what about the impact of economic development on crime in both countries? Is there anything unique about the relationship between economic development and crime in these countries?
Yes. Economic development can play a significant role in shaping crime in both countries. In Mauritius, economic development has created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of cybercrime and financial fraud. However, the country's economic development has also helped to reduce crime rates overall.
And in Myanmar, economic development has also created new opportunities for crime, particularly in the areas of human trafficking and narcotics. The country's economic development has also helped to reduce crime rates overall. Well, that's all for this criterion. I'm certain that our listeners have gained valuable insights into the safety and crime rates in Mauritius and Myanmar. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you in the next criterion.
And before we go, I'd like to remind our listeners to always exercise caution when traveling to any country, and to stay informed about local conditions.
I'm loving the vibe we're getting here. Folks, we're diving into the fascinating world of political stability and social harmony into incredible countries Mauritius and Myanmar. Let's start with Mauritius, shall we? I've heard it's a paradise for expats, with a stable government and a strong sense of community.
Mauritius is indeed a gem. But let's not get too carried away with the tropical vibes just yet. Political stability is a serious business, and I'm curious to know more about the government's approach to governance. How does it ensure that the island remains peaceful and prosperous?
Well, Leo, it's all about the Mauritian model of democracy, which is a unique blend of parliamentary and presidential systems. And I must say, it's been working wonders for the country. The government has implemented policies that promote social harmony, such as free education and healthcare, which has led to a highly educated and healthy population.
That's fascinating. I've heard that the government has also been working to reduce poverty and inequality, which is a major challenge for many developing countries. But I'm curious to know more about the social dynamics on the ground. How do the locals interact with each other? And what kind of community spirit can we expect to find in Mauritius?
Ah, the people of Mauritius are known for their warm hospitality and welcoming nature. You'll find that locals are eager to share their culture and traditions with visitors, and there's a strong sense of community pride. In fact, the island has a unique Creole culture that's a blend of African, Asian, and European influences, which makes it all the more fascinating.
That sounds like a fascinating melting pot, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the cultural events and festivals that take place on the island. What kind of celebrations can we expect to find in Mauritius?
Ah, there are so many. From the Mauritius Festival to the Lantern Festival, there's always something happening on the island. And let's not forget the delicious Creole cuisine, which is a fusion of flavors and spices that will tantalize your taste buds.
I'm getting hungry just about it. But, seriously, Mira, I think we're missing a crucial aspect of political stability and social harmony in Mauritius. What about the role of the media in shaping public opinion and holding the government accountable?
Excellent point. Leo, the media plays a vital role in Mauritius, and there are several newspapers and online platforms that provide in-depth analysis and commentary on current events. However, I must say that the government has been working to promote media freedom and independence, which is a positive step towards a more transparent and accountable system.
I see what you mean. And I'm curious to know more about the relationship between the government and the people. How do the locals feel about the government's policies and decisions?
Well, from what I've observed, the people of Mauritius are generally satisfied with the government's performance, and there's a strong sense of trust in the system. Of course, there are always areas for improvement, but overall, the island has a very positive and optimistic vibe.
That's reassuring to hear. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the opportunities for expats in Mauritius. What kind of lifestyle can we expect to find on the island?
As I mentioned earlier, Mauritius is a paradise for expats. The island offers a unique blend of modern amenities and traditional charm, making it an ideal destination for those looking to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. And with a stable government and a strong economy, expats can expect to find a high quality of life and a range of opportunities for business and leisure.
I see what you mean. And I'm curious to know more about the expat community in Mauritius. How do they interact with the locals? And what kind of cultural exchange can we expect to find?
The expat community in Mauritius is very welcoming and inclusive, and there are many opportunities for cultural exchange and integration. In fact, the island is a thriving expat community, with many international organizations and businesses represented.
That sounds like a great environment for expats. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the opportunities for business and investment in Mauritius. What kind of infrastructure and support systems can we expect to find?
Mauritius has a very business-friendly environment, with a range of incentives and support systems in place to attract investors and entrepreneurs. The island has a highly developed infrastructure, with modern roads, ports, and telecommunications, making it an ideal destination for businesses looking to expand into Africa and the Indian Ocean.
I see what you mean. And I'm curious to know more about the role of Jet Off. I am promoting business and investment in Mauritius. What kind of resources and support can our listeners expect to find?
Jet Off. AI is a fantastic resource for anyone looking to learn more about Mauritius and its business opportunities. The platform provides a wealth of information and insights on the island's economy, infrastructure, and business environment, making it an essential tool for anyone looking to invest or do business in Mauritius.
I couldn't agree more. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the opportunities for tourism and travel in Mauritius. What kind of experiences can we expect to find on the island?
Mauritius is a paradise for tourists. The island offers a range of experiences, from snorkeling and diving to hiking and bird watching. And with its stunning beaches and crystal clear waters, Mauritius is a snorkeler's and diver's dream come true.
I see what you mean. And I'm curious to know more about the relationship between the government and the tourism industry. How does the government promote and regulate tourism on the island?
The government has been working to promote and regulate tourism in Mauritius. with a focus on sustainable and responsible tourism practices. The island has a range of initiatives in place to protect the environment and preserve the island's unique cultural heritage.
I see what you mean, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the opportunities for cultural exchange and learning in Mauritius. What kind of cultural experiences can we expect to find on the island?
Mauritius has a rich and diverse cultural heritage, with a unique blend of African, Asian, and European influences. The island has a range of cultural experiences, from traditional Creole cuisine to traditional music and dance.
I see what you mean, and I'm curious to know more about the relationship between the government and the people in Myanmar. How does the government interact with the locals? And what kind of social harmony can we expect to find?
Myanmar is a very different story from Mauritius. The country has a long history of conflict and instability, and the government has been working to promote social harmony and reconciliation.
I see what.
I'm curious about Mauritius and Myanmar, two countries with vastly different economic profiles. Let's start with the basics. Which one has a stronger job market?
Mauritius has a relatively stable economy, with a GDP per capita of around $10. Zurich, it's a popular destination for expats, especially in the finance and tourism sectors. However, Myanmar's economy is still growing rapidly, with a GDP per capita of around $1,700.
That's a big difference, isn't it? I'm sure our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the country's economic stability is a major draw. But what about Myanmar? What's the job market like there?
Well, Myanmar's economy is still largely driven by agriculture, but the country is also investing heavily in infrastructure and tourism. The job market is still developing, but there are opportunities in areas like IT, tourism, and healthcare.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's economy will continue to grow and attract more foreign investment?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar has a lot of potential, especially with its rich natural resources and strategic location. However, the country still faces some challenges, like corruption and infrastructure development.
Corruption is always a major issue in developing countries. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that it's a big problem. But what about cost of living? How does it compare between the two countries?
Cost of living is a major consideration for expats. Mauritius is generally more expensive than Myanmar, especially when it comes to housing and food. However, Myanmar has a lower cost of living overall, with affordable housing and food options.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would appreciate that. But what about healthcare? How does it compare between the two countries?
Well, Mauritius has a well-developed healthcare system, with good hospitals and medical facilities. Myanmar's healthcare system is still developing, but there are some good hospitals and medical facilities, especially in major cities like Yangon.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's healthcare system will improve with more foreign investment and investment in infrastructure?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar has a lot of potential for growth and development, especially with its young population and growing economy.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that the country's economic growth is a major opportunity. But what about education? How does it compare between the two countries?
Education is a major consideration for expats with families. Mauritius has a well-developed education system, with good schools and universities. Myanmar's education system is still developing, but there are some good schools and universities, especially in major cities like Yangon.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's education system will improve with more foreign investment and investment in infrastructure?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar has a lot of potential for growth and development, especially with its young population and growing economy.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that the country's economic growth is a major opportunity. But what about taxes? How do they compare between the two countries?
Taxes are a major consideration for expats. Mauritius has a relatively low tax rate, with a top tax rate of around 15%. Myanmar's tax rate is higher, with a top tax rate of around 25%.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's tax rate will change with more foreign investment and investment in infrastructure?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar's government is looking to attract more foreign investment, and that may include changes to the tax code.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that the country's economic growth is a major opportunity. But what about overall cost of living? Which country is more affordable?
Overall cost of living is a major consideration for expats. Myanmar is generally more affordable than Mauritius, especially when it comes to housing and food.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's cost of living will change with more foreign investment and investment in infrastructure?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar's cost of living may increase as the country becomes more developed and attracts more foreign investment.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that the country's economic growth is a major opportunity. But what about job opportunities? How do they compare between the two countries?
Job opportunities are a major consideration for expats. Mauritius has a relatively strong job market, with many opportunities in areas like finance and tourism. Myanmar's job market is still developing, but there are opportunities in areas like IT, tourism, and healthcare.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Myanmar's job market will improve with more foreign investment in infrastructure?
It's definitely possible. Myanmar has a lot of potential for growth and development, especially with its young population and growing economy.
That's a great point. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would agree with me that the country's economic growth is a major opportunity. Let's dive into accommodation options and quality in Mauritius and Myanmar. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever stayed in a beachside villa in Mauritius?
Oh, yes, I have. It was a stunning property with a private pool and a view of the ocean. But I have to say, the most memorable part of my stay was the staff, who were so friendly and welcoming.
I can imagine. Mauritius is known for its hospitality. But what about Myanmar? Have you ever stayed in a temple-themed guest house in Yangon?
Actually, I have. It was a unique experience, to say the least. The guest house was decorated with traditional Burmese art and artifacts, and the owner was very knowledgeable about the local culture.
That sounds fascinating. I've heard that Myanmar has a rich cultural heritage. But what about the quality of accommodation in general? Are there any notable differences between the two countries?
Well, Mauritius has a more developed tourism infrastructure, so you'll find a wider range of accommodation options, from luxury resorts to budget-friendly guest houses. In Myanmar, the options are more limited, but still, you can find some amazing properties, especially in the bigger cities like Yangon and Mandalay.
I see. And what about the cost of accommodation? Is it more expensive in Mauritius or Myanmar?
That's a great question. Generally, Myanmar is more affordable, especially when it comes to traditional guest houses and homestays. But if you're looking for luxury accommodation, Mauritius might be a better option.
That's interesting. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you stayed in either country and have some thoughts on the accommodation options?
I'm sure we'll get some great feedback in the comments. But to continue, I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique charm when it comes to accommodation. In Mauritius, you'll find a lot of modern resorts and hotels, while in Myanmar, you'll find more traditional and cultural experiences.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes both countries so special. But what about the rental market? Is it easy to find a place to rent in either country?
Well, Mauritius has a more developed rental market, so you'll find a wider range of options, from apartments to villas. In Myanmar, the rental market is less developed, but you can still find some great options, especially in the bigger cities.
I see. And what about the safety of accommodation? Are there any concerns that travelers should be aware of?
Ah, that's a great question. Generally, both countries are considered safe. But, as with anywhere, there are some areas that are better avoided. In Mauritius, you'll find that the resorts and hotels are usually very secure. While in Myanmar, you'll need to be more mindful of your surroundings, especially in the bigger cities.
I understand. And what about the environmental impact of tourism? Are there any concerns about the sustainability of accommodation options in either country?
Well, Mauritius has made a big effort to reduce its environmental impact, with many resorts and hotels implementing sustainable practices. In Myanmar, there are also some great initiatives underway, but it's still an area that needs more attention.
I see. And finally, what about the local culture? Are there any unique cultural experiences that travelers can have in either country?
Ah, that's a great question. Both countries have a rich cultural heritage, but I think Myanmar has a bit more to offer in terms of cultural experiences. From traditional festivals to local markets, there's always something to discover.
I agree. And I think that's what makes both countries so special. But what do you think? Leo, have you had any particularly memorable cultural experiences in either country?
Ah, yes. In Myanmar, I had the chance to attend a traditional festival, which was an incredible experience. And in Mauritius, I had the chance to learn some traditional dance moves, which was a lot of fun.
I can imagine. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences. Maybe we can get some feedback in the comments and plan a future episode on cultural experiences in either country.
Sounds like a plan to me. And before we go, I just want to say that I think both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to accommodation options and quality. From luxury resorts to traditional guest houses, there's something for every budget and preference.
I completely agree. And I think that's what makes both countries so special. Thanks for joining me, Leo, and I hope our listeners found this episode informative and entertaining.
Thanks for having me, Mira. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting episodes on travel and culture.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of visa and immigration procedures, shall we? I'm curious about how Mauritius stacks up compared to Myanmar.
Ah, great point, Mira. I think both countries have their own unique quirks when it comes to paperwork and bureaucracy. In Mauritius, I've heard that the e-visa system is quite user-friendly, making it easier for tourists and expats to navigate.
That's true. Leo, but have you ever tried to apply for a visa in Myanmar? I've heard it's a bit more complicated.
Complicated is one way to put it, Mira. But seriously, Myanmar's visa process can be a bit of a maze, especially for first-time applicants. However, once you get through the initial hurdle, the rest of the process is relatively smooth sailing.
I see what you mean. But what about the ease of obtaining a residence permit in Mauritius? I've heard it's a relatively straightforward process.
Ah, yes. Mauritius has a reputation for being quite welcoming to expats, and the residence permit process reflects that. It's relatively easy to obtain, and the requirements are clearly outlined on the government's website.
That's great to hear. Leo, but what about the language barrier in Myanmar? I've heard that not everyone speaks English, which can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system.
Yes, that's true. Mira, Myanmar is a predominantly Burmese-speaking country, and while many people in the tourism industry speak English, it's not always the case. However, there are many online resources and translation services available to help expats navigate the process.
I'm curious. Leo, have you ever had to deal with any bureaucratic issues while living in Myanmar? Any war stories you'd like to share?
Oh, well, I did have one experience where I had to deal with a particularly stubborn government official. Let's just say it was a learning experience. And I've been more prepared ever since.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about that story. Leo, but moving on, what about the cost of obtaining a visa or residence permit in Mauritius? Is it relatively affordable?
Ah, yes. Mauritius is generally a more affordable option when it comes to visa and immigration costs. The fees are relatively low, and the process is relatively quick.
That's great to hear. Leo, but what about the process of renewing a visa or residence permit in Myanmar? Is it straightforward?
Well, Mira, I think that's where things can get a bit more complicated. The renewal process in Myanmar can be a bit more involved, and the requirements can change depending on your specific situation.
I see what you mean. Leah, but I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any tips or advice you have on navigating the process.
Absolutely. Mira, one tip I would give is to make sure you have all the necessary documents and information before attempting to renew your visa or residence permit. It's also a good idea to work with a reputable visa service or attorney to help guide you through the process.
That's great advice. Leo, and finally, I'm curious about the overall experience of living in Mauritius versus Myanmar. What are some of the key differences you've noticed?
Well, Mira, I think one of the biggest differences is the pace of life. Mauritius is generally a more laid-back and relaxed environment, while Myanmar is a bit more fast-paced and chaotic.
I see what you mean. Leo, but what about the cost of living in each country? Is it relatively affordable in Mauritius?
Yes. Mauritius is generally a more affordable option when it comes to cost of living. The cost of food, housing, and transportation is relatively low compared to other countries in the region.
That's great to hear. Leah. And finally, I'm curious about the overall sense of community in each country. Do you think it's easier to make friends and connect with locals in Mauritius versus Myanmar?
Well, Mira, I think that's a great question. I think both countries have their own unique cultures and communities. But I would say that Mauritius is generally more welcoming to expats and tourists. The locals are friendly and eager to connect with visitors.
That's great to hear. Leo! And I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences with us. Leo!
Thanks, Mira. It was a pleasure to share my thoughts and experiences with you and our listeners.
I'm so to dive into the healthcare systems of Mauritius and Myanmar. Mira has been to both countries and had some amazing experiences with their healthcare. Let's start with Mauritius. Mira has heard that Mauritius has a well-developed healthcare system, with modern hospitals and medical facilities.
That's true. Mauritius has invested heavily in its healthcare infrastructure. They have a mix of public and private hospitals, and the quality of care is generally good. In fact, Mauritius has a higher life expectancy than many other countries in the region.
Wow, that's impressive. And what about the cost of healthcare in Mauritius? I heard it's relatively affordable compared to other countries.
Yes, that's correct. Mauritius has a well-regulated healthcare market, which helps keep costs under control. Additionally, the country has a strong social safety net, which ensures that everyone has access to basic healthcare services.
That's great to hear. And what about Myanmar? Mira has heard that the healthcare system in Myanmar is still developing.
Yes, that's true. Myanmar's healthcare system is still in its early stages, and there are many challenges to overcome. However, the government has made significant efforts to improve healthcare access and quality in recent years.
I'm sure our listeners living in Myanmar would agree with you. They must have experienced firsthand the challenges of accessing quality healthcare in the country.
Absolutely. And it's not just about access to healthcare, but also about the quality of care. In Myanmar, there are still many shortages of medical supplies and equipment, which can make it difficult for patients to receive the care they need.
That's heartbreaking to hear. But I'm sure the government is working hard to address these issues. Lyra has heard that Myanmar has made significant progress in reducing child mortality rates. For example,
Yes, that's correct. Myanmar has made significant progress in reducing child mortality rates, and the country is also working to improve maternal health outcomes. However, there is still much work to be done to ensure that all citizens have access to quality health care.
I'm curious to know, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the healthcare system in Myanmar?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges facing the healthcare system in Myanmar is the lack of skilled healthcare professionals. Many healthcare workers have left the country in recent years, which has put a strain on the healthcare system.
That's a great point. And what about the cost of healthcare in Myanmar? I've heard it's quite high compared to other countries.
Yes, that's true. The cost of healthcare in Myanmar can be quite high, especially for those who don't have access to private health insurance. However, the government has made efforts to increase access to affordable healthcare, such as through the introduction of a national health insurance program.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any tips on how to navigate the healthcare system in Myanmar. Do you have any advice?
Yes. What if I would give is to always research and choose a reputable hospital or clinic. Additionally, it's always a good idea to have a medical evacuation plan in place, especially if you're traveling to rural areas.
Great advice. Leo. And finally, what do you think is the most surprising thing about the healthcare system in Myanmar?
That's a great question. I think one of the most surprising things about the healthcare system in Myanmar is the high level of traditional medicine that is still practiced in the country. Many people in Myanmar rely on traditional medicine, such as herbal remedies and spiritual healing, to treat a range of health conditions.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about traditional medicine in Myanmar. Mira has heard that it's a unique and fascinating aspect of the country's healthcare system.
Absolutely. And it's not just about traditional medicine, but also about the cultural nuances of healthcare in Myanmar. For example, in Myanmar, it's common for patients to be treated with respect and dignity, even in the midst of a medical emergency.
That's so important. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any tips on how to navigate the cultural nuances of healthcare in Myanmar. Do you have any advice?
Yes. One tip I would give is to always be respectful of local customs and traditions, especially when it comes to healthcare. Additionally, it's always a good idea to learn a few basic phrases in Burmese, such as hello and thank you, to show appreciation for the care you receive.
Great advice. Leo. And finally, what do you think is the key to improving the healthcare system in Myanmar?
That's a great question. I think the key to improving the healthcare system in Myanmar is to invest in the training and education of healthcare professionals, as well as to improve access to quality healthcare services, particularly in rural areas.
I couldn't agree more. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any final thoughts on the healthcare system in Myanmar.
Yes. In conclusion, while there are many challenges facing the healthcare system in Myanmar, the country is making significant progress in improving access to quality healthcare services, with continued investment in healthcare infrastructure and education, as well as a focus on cultural nuances and traditional medicine. Myanmar has the potential to become a leader in healthcare in the region.
Wow, that's a great conclusion. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any final thoughts on the healthcare system in Mauritius.
Yes. In Mauritius, the healthcare system is generally well developed, with modern hospitals and medical facilities. However, there are still challenges to overcome, such as access to healthcare services in rural areas.
I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any final thoughts on how to navigate the healthcare system in Mauritius. Do you have any advice?
Yes. One tip I would give is to always research and choose a reputable hospital or clinic, and to have a medical evacuation plan in place, especially if you're traveling to rural areas.
Great advice. Leah. And finally, what do you think is the most surprising thing about the healthcare system in Mauritius?
That's a great question. I think one of the most surprising things about the healthcare system in Mauritius is the high level of patient satisfaction, despite the challenges facing the system.
Well, that's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the healthcare system in Mauritius. Mira has heard that it's a unique and fascinating aspect of the country's healthcare system.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the healthcare system, but also about the cultural nuances of healthcare in Mauritius. For example, in Mauritius, it's common for patients to be treated with respect and dignity, even in the midst of a medical emergency.
That's so important. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any tips on how to navigate the cultural nuances of healthcare in. Dive into transportation infrastructure and convenience in Mauritius and Myanmar. Both countries have unique challenges, but also some exciting developments. I bet our listeners in Mauritius are familiar with the island's famous Grand Bassin bus system. How's that experience been for you, Leo?
Ah, yes, the Grand Bassin. It's a real challenge, especially during peak hours. I've seen buses packed to the brim, and it's not uncommon to see people standing on the roof. But, it's all part of the charm, right?
Charm? I'm not sure I'd call it that. Leo, but seriously, have you noticed any improvements in public transportation in Mauritius? Maybe some new bus routes or better road conditions?
Actually, yes. There have been some efforts to improve the bus system, including the introduction of new buses and a more efficient scheduling system. And, of course, the scenic coastal roads are always a treat to drive on.
That sounds great. I'm sure our listeners in Mauritius appreciate those improvements. Now, let's talk about Myanmar. I've heard that the country's transportation infrastructure is still developing, but there are some exciting projects underway. Can you tell us more about that? Leo?
Yes. Myanmar. The country has made significant strides in developing its transportation infrastructure, including the construction of new roads and bridges. And, of course, the iconic Yangon Circular Railway is a must-see for any visitor.
The Yangon Circular Railway. That sounds fascinating. I've heard it's a great way to see the city's sights while also getting a glimpse into local life. Have you taken the train? Leo?
Yes, I have. It's an experience I'll never forget. The train wends its way through the city, passing by bustling markets and street food stalls. And, of course, the locals are always eager to chat and share their stories.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would love to hear more about the train experience. Now, let's talk about road quality. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar has some bumpy roads. But Myanmar's roads are particularly notorious for their poor condition.
Yes. The roads in Myanmar can be quite rough, especially in rural areas. But, it's all part of the adventure, right?
I suppose so. Leo? But seriously, how do you think the government can improve road conditions in Myanmar? Maybe by investing in more maintenance or infrastructure projects?
That's a great question. Mira, I think the government could definitely invest more in road maintenance and infrastructure projects. And, of course, there's always the option of upgrading to more modern buses and trains.
That makes sense. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would appreciate any improvements to the transportation system. Now, let's talk about traffic congestion. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar have their share of traffic jams, but Myanmar's traffic is particularly notorious for its chaos.
Yes. The traffic in Myanmar can be quite creative, shall we say. But, it's all part of the fun, right?
I suppose so. Leo! But seriously, how do you think the government can reduce traffic congestion in Myanmar? Maybe by investing in more public transportation options or improving road infrastructure?
That's a great question. Mira, I think the government could definitely invest more in public transportation options and road infrastructure. And, of course, there's always the option of promoting alternative modes of transportation, like bicycles or motorbikes.
That's a great idea. Leo! I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would appreciate any efforts to reduce traffic congestion. Now, let's talk about airport infrastructure. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar have modern airports, but Myanmar's airports are particularly well equipped for international travel.
Yes. The airports in Myanmar are definitely a highlight of the country's transportation infrastructure. And, of course, the scenic views of the surrounding countryside are always a bonus.
That sounds great. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would love to hear more about the airport experience. Now, let's talk about water transportation. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar have a strong maritime history. But Myanmar's waterways are particularly important for trade and commerce.
Ah, yes. The waterways in Myanmar are definitely a key part of the country's transportation infrastructure. And, of course, the scenic views of the surrounding countryside are always a bonus.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would love to hear more about the waterways. Now, let's talk about the role of technology in transportation. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar are investing in digital solutions to improve transportation efficiency and convenience.
Ah, yes. The use of technology in transportation is definitely on the rise in both countries. And, of course, the potential benefits are huge, from reducing congestion to improving safety.
That's a great point. Leo, I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would appreciate any efforts to improve transportation efficiency and convenience. Now, let's talk about the impact of transportation on the environment. I've heard that both Mauritius and Myanmar are taking steps to reduce their carbon footprint and promote sustainable transportation.
Ah, yes. The importance of sustainable transportation cannot be overstated. And, of course, both countries are making efforts to reduce their carbon footprint and promote environmentally friendly transportation options.
That's a great topic. Leo, I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would love to hear more about sustainable transportation initiatives. Now, let's talk about the future of transportation in both countries. I've heard that there are some exciting projects underway, from electric vehicles to high-speed rail.
Ah, yes. The future of transportation in both countries is indeed exciting. And, of course, there are many opportunities for innovation and growth in the transportation sector.
That's a great note to end on. Leo, I'm sure our listeners in Myanmar would appreciate any updates on the latest transportation developments. Thanks for sharing your insights. Leo.
Thanks. Vera, it's been a pleasure to share my thoughts on transportation in Mauritius and Myanmar. I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation as much as I have.
And so to dive into the language barrier and ease of communication in Mauritius and Myanmar. As we all know, language is a crucial aspect of any culture, and understanding it can make or break your experience in a foreign country.
Ah, I completely agree with you. Mira, language is like the key to unlocking a culture. And let me tell you, Mauritius and Myanmar have some fascinating language stories to share.
Yes, and I think our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the official language is English, French, and Creole. But have you ever tried to order a coffee in Creole? Leo? It's like a beautiful mess of sounds and words.
Oh, Mira, you're always making me laugh. But seriously, Creole is a beautiful language, and I've had the pleasure of learning some basic phrases during my travels. And I must say, the locals are always so welcoming and eager to help.
That's so true. Leo. The Mauritian people are known for their hospitality, and their language is just one of the many aspects that make them so special. And speaking of languages, Myanmar has its own unique story to tell.
Ah, yes. Myanmar, also known as Burma, has a rich linguistic heritage, with over 100 languages spoken across the country. But the official language is Burmese, which is a member of the Sino-Tibetan language family.
Wow, that's amazing. I've always been fascinated by the diversity of languages in Myanmar. And I think our listeners who have experienced the language barrier in Myanmar would agree with me that it can be quite challenging at times.
Absolutely. Mira, language barriers can be frustrating. But, as you said, it's all part of the experience. And I think it's wonderful that our listeners can share their own experiences and tips on navigating language barriers in the comments.
That's so true. Leo, and speaking of tips, I think one of the most important things to remember when communicating in a foreign language is to be patient and respectful. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And always try to learn a few basic phrases in the local language.
Mira, you're always so right. And I think it's also essential to remember that language is not just about speaking, but also about listening and understanding. And in Myanmar, the locals are always eager to share their language and culture with visitors.
That's so true. Leo, and I think our listeners would agree with me that the best way to learn a language is through immersion. Whether it's through language classes, language exchange programs, or simply living with a local family, immersion is the key to language learning.
I couldn't agree more. Mira, and I think it's also essential to remember that language is a tool for communication, not just a means to convey information. And in Mauritius and Myanmar, the locals are always using language to connect with each other and with visitors.
That's so beautiful. Leo, and I think our listeners would agree with me that the language barrier is not just a challenge, but also an opportunity to learn and grow. Whether it's through language classes, language exchange programs, or simply living with a local family, language learning is a journey that can enrich our lives in so many ways.
Absolutely. Mira. And I think it's also essential to remember that language is a part of culture, and that understanding language is essential to understanding culture. And in Mauritius and Myanmar, the language is just one of the many aspects that make their culture so unique and special.
That's so true. Leo, and I think our listeners would agree with me that the language barrier is not just a challenge, but also an opportunity to experience the beauty and diversity of different cultures, whether it's through language classes, language exchange programs, or simply living with a local family. Language learning is a journey that can enrich our lives in so many ways.
I think we've covered a lot of ground in this topic. Mira, but I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about language barriers in Mauritius and Myanmar. Do you have any tips or experiences to share?
Absolutely. Leo, and I think our listeners would love to hear about your experiences with language barriers in Mauritius and Myanmar. Please share your stories and tips in the comments below.
Thank you. Mira, I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to share. And, as we conclude this topic, I think it's essential to remember that language is a beautiful tool for communication, and that understanding language is essential to understanding culture.
That's so true. Leo, and I think our listeners would agree with me that the language barrier is not just a challenge, but also an opportunity to learn and grow. Whether it's through language classes, language exchange programs, or simply living with a local family. Language learning is a journey that can enrich our lives in so many ways.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think we've covered a lot of ground in this topic, but I'm sure our listeners will have a lot more to share and discuss. And as we move on to our next topic, I'm to explore the cuisine of Mauritius and Myanmar.
Yes. The cuisine of Mauritius and Myanmar is a fascinating topic, and I'm sure our listeners will love to hear about it. And as we conclude this podcast, I want to thank our listeners for joining us on this journey of discovery and exploration. I'm so to dive into cultural diversity and tolerance in Mauritius and Myanmar. Two countries that have truly mastered the art of embracing differences. In Mauritius, the island's melting pot of cultures is reflected in its stunning festivals, delicious Creole cuisine, and vibrant markets. Have you ever been to a Siga night? Leo?
Yes. Siga is an incredible experience. Mira, the music, the dance, the energy is also infectious. And the best part is, it's a celebration of the island's diverse heritage. I mean, where else can you find Hindu temples, Muslim mosques, and Christian churches all coexisting in harmony?
Exactly. And it's not just the festivals that showcase Mauritius' cultural diversity. The island's cuisine is a delicious blend of African, European, and Asian flavors. Have you tried the Mauritian fish curry? Leah?
Oh, I have. And let me tell you, it's a game changer. The combination of spices, The freshness of the fish, it's a culinary masterpiece. And it's amazing to see how the different cultures have influenced the cuisine, making it uniquely Mauritian.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the island's cultural diversity is one of its greatest strengths. And speaking of strength, Myanmar is another country that has made significant strides in promoting cultural tolerance and understanding.
Ah, yes. Myanmar's rich cultural heritage is evident in its stunning temples, ancient pagodas, and vibrant festivals. And the people. Oh, the people there are some of the warmest and most welcoming I've ever met.
That's so true. Leo. And I think one of the key factors in Myanmar's cultural diversity is its commitment to preserving traditional practices and customs. For example, the country's many ethnic groups have their own unique languages, traditions, and festivals.
Exactly. And it's not just about preserving traditions. It's also about embracing change and modernity. Myanmar has made significant strides in promoting education and economic development, which has helped to reduce poverty and improve living standards.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Leo, do you think that cultural diversity and tolerance are more important in some countries than others?
Well, I think that cultural diversity and tolerance are essential in every country. Yeah, but I do think that some countries have a more challenging time embracing differences. For example, in some countries, there may be more social and economic inequalities that can make it harder for people to get along.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think that's why it's so important for countries to promote cultural tolerance and understanding through education and community programs. For example, in Mauritius, there are many initiatives that bring people together to promote cultural exchange and understanding.
Ah, yes. And in Myanmar, there are also many initiatives that promote cultural tolerance and understanding. For example, the country's many festivals and celebrations bring people together from different ethnic and religious backgrounds.
I'm certain that our listeners would agree with me that cultural diversity and tolerance are essential for building a harmonious and inclusive society. And speaking of harmony, have you ever been to a traditional Burmese New Year celebration? Leo?
Ah, yes. The Thingy and Festival is an incredible experience. Yeah, the music, the dance, the splashing water, it's also joyful and celebratory.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how cultural diversity and tolerance can bring people together in a spirit of joy and celebration. And speaking of celebration, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the importance of cultural diversity and tolerance in their own countries.
Well, I think that's a great question. Yeah, and I'm sure our listeners would have many interesting perspectives to share. Perhaps we can invite some of our listeners to share their thoughts and experiences with us in a future episode.
That's a great idea. And speaking of future episodes, I'm to continue our conversation on cultural diversity and tolerance in Mauritius and Myanmar. Stay tuned, everyone, for more fascinating insights and stories from these incredible countries. I'm absolutely by the educational landscape in Mauritius. From what I've gathered, the literacy rate is extremely high, with over 90% of the population able to read and write.
That's incredible. And I've heard that the government has implemented some innovative programs to improve education, such as the Mauritius Quality Award, which recognizes excellence in teaching and learning.
Yes, and I've also come across some amazing language schools in Mauritius that offer English language courses for foreigners. One of them is the English Language Institute, which has a great reputation for teaching English as a second language.
Ah, I've heard of that one. My friend's brother went there and said it was an amazing experience. He even got to practice his English with locals, which really helped him improve his language skills.
Exactly. And I'm sure that's one of the benefits of studying in a country like Mauritius, where the language is English but the culture is so rich and diverse. I'm sure our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the language schools, they're top-notch.
Absolutely. And speaking of language schools, I've been researching some options in Myanmar, and I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the language schools there. Do you think it's true that Myanmar has a more laid-back approach to education?
Oh, that's an interesting point. From what I've read, Myanmar does seem to have a more relaxed attitude towards education, with a focus on rote memorization rather than critical.
Ah, I see what you mean. But I've also heard that the government is making efforts to reform the education system and introduce more modern teaching methods.
Yes, then I think that's a great move. After all, education is key to a country's development and progress. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that language skills are essential for anyone looking to study or work abroad.
Exactly. And speaking of language skills, I've been about taking a language course in Myanmar to improve my Burmese. Do you think it's a good idea, Mira?
Oh, Leo, you're such a jokester. But seriously, I think it's a great idea to learn a new language, especially one as beautiful and complex as Burmese. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your language learning adventures.
Mira, I'll definitely keep you posted on my progress. And speaking of language learning, I've been looking into some amazing language schools in Myanmar that offer English language courses for foreigners.
That's great. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about those schools. Can you tell us more about them, Leo?
Sure thing. One of the schools I've been looking at is the Myanmar English Language Institute, which offers a range of English language courses for foreigners, including business English and academic English.
Wow, that sounds like an amazing opportunity for anyone looking to improve their English skills. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the application process and the curriculum offered by the school.
Great point. Mira, I'll definitely look into that and share more information with our listeners. And speaking of language schools, I've been wondering if you think it's true that Mauritius has a more competitive education system than Myanmar.
That's an interesting point. From what I've read, Mauritius does seem to have a more competitive education system, with students competing for limited spots in top universities.
Oh, I see what you mean. But I've also heard that Myanmar is making efforts to improve its education system and increase access to education for all.
Yes, and I think that's a great move. After all, education should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their background or socio-economic status. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that education is key to a country's development and progress.
Exactly. And speaking of education, I've been about visiting some of the universities in Myanmar to see firsthand how they operate. Do you think it would be a good idea, Mira?
Oh, Leah, you're such a curious one. But seriously, I think it would be a great idea to visit some of the universities in Myanmar and see how they operate. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences.
Thanks. Mira, I'll definitely keep you posted on my progress. And speaking of progress, I've been about the impact of technology on education in both Mauritius and Myanmar.
That's a great topic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about how technology is being used to improve education in both countries.
Great point. Mira, I'll definitely look into that and share more information with our listeners. And speaking of technology, I've been wondering if you think it's true that Myanmar has a more limited access to technology than Mauritius.
That's an interesting point. From what I've read, Myanmar does seem to have a more limited access to technology, with fewer internet cafes and online resources available.
I see what you mean. But I've also heard that the government is making efforts to increase access to technology and improve the country's digital infrastructure.
Yes, and I think that's a great move. After all, access to technology is essential for anyone looking to access education and information online. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that technology is key to a country's development and progress.
Exactly. And speaking of progress, I've been about the role of language schools in promoting cultural exchange and understanding between Mauritius and Myanmar.
That's a great topic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about how language schools are promoting cultural exchange and understanding between the two countries.
Great point. Mira, I'll definitely look into that and share more information with our listeners. And speaking of cultural exchange, I've been wondering if you think it's true that Mauritius has a more diverse cultural landscape than Myanmar.
Ah, that's an interesting point. From what I've read, Mauritius does seem to have a more diverse cultural landscape, with a mix of African, European, and Asian influences.
Ah, I see what you mean. But I've also heard that Myanmar has a rich cultural heritage, with a mix of Buddhist and traditional influences.
Yes, and I think that's a great point. After all, culture is an essential part of any country's identity and heritage. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that cultural exchange and understanding are key to promoting peace and cooperation between countries.
Exactly. And speaking of cooperation, I've been about the role of language schools in promoting educational cooperation between Mauritius and Myanmar.
Ah, that's a great topic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know. I'm loving this conversation about climate and seasonal conditions. Leo, let's talk about Mauritius and Myanmar, two countries with unique environments. In Mauritius, the tropical climate is perfect for beach lovers, with temperatures ranging from 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. I mean, who doesn't love a warm and sunny day?
That's right. Mira. And what's interesting is that Mauritius has a dry season from May to October, which is ideal for outdoor activities like hiking and water sports. But, on the other hand, Myanmar has a more varied climate, with 4 distinct seasons: winter, spring, summer, and monsoon. I've heard that the monsoon season can be quite intense.
Yes. The monsoon season in Myanmar can be a bit dramatic, but it's also a great time for locals to harvest crops and replenish water sources. And did you know that Myanmar has a unique phenomenon called the hot season, where the temperature can soar up to 40 degrees Celsius? That's even hotter than Mauritius.
Wow, that's indeed scorching. But I've also read that the winter season in Myanmar is quite mild, with temperatures ranging from 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. It's a great time to explore the country's ancient temples and monasteries without the sweltering heat. And speaking of heat, I've heard that Mauritius has a unique way of coping with the sun. The locals use a type of umbrella called a pavilion to protect themselves from the sun.
Oh, yes. The pavilion is a great example of how Mauritian culture adapts to its environment. And did you know that Myanmar also has a unique way of coping with the heat? The locals use a type of fan called a padok to keep themselves cool.
Ah, I love it. The paddock is a great example of how Myanmar's culture has developed unique solutions to its environmental challenges. But I'm curious, Mira, have you ever experienced the monsoon season in Myanmar? How do you think it compares to the dry season in Mauritius?
Oh, Leo, I've been lucky enough to experience both. And let me tell you, the monsoon season in Myanmar is a whole different ball game. The rain is intense, but it's also a great time to explore the country's lush green landscapes and waterfalls. And as for the dry season in Mauritius, it's perfect for outdoor activities like hiking and water sports.
That's right. Mira! And speaking of outdoor activities, I've heard that Myanmar has a unique festival called the Tanjik Hot Air Balloon Festival, where locals release hot air balloons into the sky during the winter season. It's a great way to experience the country's culture and environment.
Ah, yes. The Tanjik Hot Air Balloon Festival is a fantastic example of how Myanmar's culture celebrates its environment. And did you know that Mauritius also has a unique festival called the Mauritius Festival, where locals celebrate the country's cultural heritage with music, dance, and food?
Ah, I love it. The Mauritius Festival is a great example of how Mauritius's culture celebrates its unique environment. But I'm curious. Mira, have you ever experienced the Tanjik Hot Air Balloon Festival in Myanmar? How do you think it compares to the Mauritius Festival?
Oh, Leo, I've been lucky enough to experience both. And let me tell you, the Tanjik Hot Air Balloon Festival is a whole different level of excitement. The hot air balloons are so colorful and vibrant, And the festival is a great way to experience Myanmar's culture and environment. And as for the Mauritius festival, it's a great way to experience the country's cultural heritage and music.
That's right. Vera. And speaking of music, I've heard that Myanmar has a unique genre of music called the Burma-style music, which is influenced by the country's cultural heritage. It's a great way to experience the country's unique sound.
Ah, yes. The Burma-style music is a fantastic example of how Myanmar's culture has developed unique musical traditions. And did you know that Mauritius also has a unique genre of music called the Mauritian Sega music, which is influenced by the country's African and European cultural heritage?
I love it. The Mauritian Sega music is a great example of how Mauritius's culture has developed unique musical traditions. And I'm curious, Mira, have you ever experienced the Tonjik Hot Air Balloon Festival in Myanmar? How do you think it compares to the Mauritius Festival?
Oh, Leo, I've been lucky enough to experience both. And let me tell you, the Tonjik Hot Air Balloon Festival is a whole different ballgame. The hot air balloons are so colorful and vibrant, and the festival is a great way to experience Myanmar's culture and environment. And as for the Mauritius Festival, it's a great way to experience the country's cultural heritage and music.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of music, I've heard that Myanmar has a unique way of celebrating its festivals with music and dance. The locals use a type of drum called the gong to create a lively rhythm.
Ah, yes. The gong is a great example of how Myanmar's culture uses music and dance to celebrate its festivals. And did you know that Mauritius also has a unique way of celebrating its festivals with music and dance? The locals use a type of instrument called the tambourine to create a lively rhythm.
I love it. The tambourine is a great example of how Mauritius's culture uses music and dance to celebrate its festivals. And I'm curious, Mira, have you ever experienced the monsoon season in Myanmar? How do you think it compares to the dry season in Mauritius?
Oh, Leo, I've been lucky enough to experience both. And let me tell you, the monsoon season in Myanmar is a whole different ball game. The rain is intense, but it's also a great time to explore the country's lush green landscapes and waterfalls. As for the dry season in Mauritius, it's perfect for outdoor activities like hiking and water sports.
That's right, Mira. And speaking of outdoor activities, I've heard that Myanmar has a unique way of preserving its forests and wildlife. The locals use a type of conservation program called the Myanmar Forest Department to protect the country's natural resources.
Ah, yes. The Myanmar Forest Department is a great example of how Myanmar's culture prioritizes the preservation of its natural resources. And did you know that Mauritius also has a unique way of preserving its forests? And I'm telling you, Leo, Mauritius is a foodie's paradise. The island nation is a melting pot of flavors, with influences from Africa, Europe, and Asia.
I can see why you'd say that. I've had my fair share of Mauritian street food, and let me tell you, it's a flavor explosion. But I have to ask, have you tried the local specialty, the Mauritian pani puri?
Oh yes, I have. And I must say, it's a unique combination of flavors. But I think what I love most about Mauritian cuisine is the use of fresh seafood and spices. It's a perfect blend of East meets West.
That's so true. And speaking of East meets West, have you ever tried the Burmese dish, Lapechiti? It's a staple in Myanmar, and it's essentially a salad made with fermented tea leaves.
Oh, yes, I have. And it's actually quite similar to the Mauritian dish, the pani puri. But I think what's interesting is how Myanmar has its own unique take on Asian cuisine. The use of fermented tea leaves, for example, is a distinctive feature of Burmese cuisine.
Exactly. And it's not just the use of fermented tea leaves that makes Burmese cuisine unique. The country has a rich history of culinary innovation, with influences from India, China, and Southeast Asia.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think there's a common thread between Mauritian and Burmese cuisine? Perhaps a shared love of spices and fresh ingredients?
Well, I think it's safe to say that spices are a common thread between many cuisines in the region. But what's interesting is how each country has its own unique twist on traditional flavors.
That's so true. And I think it's also worth noting that both Mauritius and Myanmar have a strong focus on locally sourced ingredients. In Mauritius, for example, the emphasis is on fresh seafood and tropical fruits, while in Myanmar, the use of fermented teal, leaves, and other local ingredients is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
I see what you mean. And it's not just about the ingredients themselves, but also the way they're prepared and presented. In Myanmar, for example, the use of street food vendors and markets is a big part of the culinary culture.
Oh, yes. I've had my fair share of street food in Myanmar, and I must say, it's a thrill to try new and exotic dishes. But I think what's also interesting is how both countries have their own unique take on traditional desserts.
Yes. The desserts. In Myanmar, for example, the traditional dessert, the laddu, is a sweet and nutty delight. And in Mauritius, the use of tropical fruits and spices in desserts is a hallmark of Mauritian cuisine.
Oh, yes. I've had the laddu in Myanmar, and it's a game changer. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on traditional medicine.
Yes. The use of herbs and spices in traditional medicine is a big part of both Mauritian and Burmese culture. In Myanmar, for example, the use of herbs like turmeric and ginger is a staple in traditional medicine.
Oh, yes. I've heard of the benefits of turmeric and ginger. But I think what's also interesting is how both countries have their own unique take on modern cuisine.
Yes. The fusion of traditional and modern cuisine is a big part of both Mauritian and Burmese culture. In Myanmar, for example, the use of modern ingredients and cooking techniques is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh, yes. I've had the pleasure of trying modern Burmese cuisine, and it's a real treat. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on food culture.
Yes. The food culture in both Mauritius and Myanmar is a big part of the country's identity. In Myanmar, for example, the use of street food vendors and markets is a big part of the culinary culture.
Oh, yes. I've had my fair share of street food in Myanmar. And I must say, it's a thrill to try new and exotic dishes. But I think what's also interesting is how both countries have their own unique take on food traditions.
Yes. The food traditions in both Mauritius and Myanmar are a big part of the country's cultural heritage. In Myanmar, for example, the use of traditional dishes and ingredients is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh yes. I've had the pleasure of trying traditional Burmese dishes, and it's a real treat. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on food innovation.
Yes. The use of innovative ingredients and cooking techniques is a big part of both Mauritian and Burmese cuisine. In Myanmar, for example, the use of modern ingredients and cooking techniques is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh, yes. I've had the pleasure of trying modern Burmese cuisine, and it's a real treat. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on food and culture.
Yes. The food and culture in both Mauritius and Myanmar are a big part of the country's identity. In Myanmar, for example, the use of traditional dishes and ingredients is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh, yes. I've had the pleasure of trying traditional Burmese dishes, and it's a real treat. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on food and traditions.
Yes. The food traditions in both Mauritius and Myanmar are a big part of the country's cultural heritage. In Myanmar, for example, the use of traditional dishes and ingredients is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh yes. I've had the pleasure of trying traditional Burmese dishes, and it's a real treat. But I think what's also worth noting is how both countries have their own unique take on food innovation.
Ah, yes. The use of innovative ingredients and cooking techniques is a big part of both Mauritian and Burmese cuisine. In Myanmar, for example, the use of modern ingredients and cooking techniques is a hallmark of Burmese cuisine.
Oh yes, I've had the pleasure of trying modern Burmese cuisine, and it's a real treat. Mauritius boasts an incredible array of historical sites, from the 17th century Fortatalate to the 19th century Sugiten Duval building, showcasing the island's rich colonial past. Jet off. I love uncovering stories like this, and so do we.
That's fascinating. But let's not forget about Myanmar, which has its own share of ancient landmarks, like the Sritagon Pagoda in Yangon, one of the most sacred Buddhist sites in the country. It's a testament to the country's rich spiritual heritage.
Ah, yes. The Sritagon Pagoda is indeed a breathtaking sight. But have you ever heard of the AA Pravasigat in Mauritius? It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that commemorates the arrival of indentured laborers from India in the 19th century. It's a poignant reminder of the island's complex history.
Wow, that's a great example. In Myanmar, we have the ancient city of Bagan, which is home to over 2,000 that we can count by that. Zoro temples and pagodas. It's a true marvel of architecture and a testament to the country's rich cultural heritage. I'm curious, Mira, what do you think is the most striking aspect of Mauritius' cultural scene?
That's a tough question, but I think it's the blend of African, European, and Asian influences that makes Mauritius so unique. From the Creole language to the delicious fusion cuisine, there's a palpable sense of diversity and cultural exchange. And let's not forget about the island's rich musical heritage, with genres like Siga and Joe Pieri.
You're making me want to dance. Mira, but seriously, I think you're right. The cultural exchange in Mauritius is truly fascinating. In Myanmar, we have a similar phenomenon, with the influence of Theravada Buddhism and the traditional Burmese culture. It's a beautiful blend of spirituality and tradition.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes both countries so interesting, the way they've managed to preserve their unique cultural identities while still embracing the influences of the outside world. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me.
I'm sure they would. And speaking of cultural preservation, I've heard that Myanmar has a thriving art scene, with a focus on traditional crafts like lacquerware and textiles. Have you had a chance to explore this aspect of Myanmar's culture? Mira.
Actually, I haven't, but I'd love to. From what I've heard, the art scene in Myanmar is incredibly vibrant, with a focus on preserving traditional techniques and styles. And I'm sure that AI would love to feature some of these artisans on their platform, showcasing their incredible craftsmanship.
That's a great idea. Mira, and I think we should definitely explore this aspect of Myanmar's culture further. Perhaps we could even invite some of the artisans to join us on the show and share their stories.
That would be fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the art scene in Myanmar. Who knows? Maybe we'll even inspire some new artists to emerge from the country.
Well, we can certainly try. And speaking of inspiration, I've heard that the natural beauty of Mauritius is truly breathtaking. Have you had a chance to explore the island's stunning landscapes? Mira?
Oh, yes. The isle is home to some of the most beautiful beaches and waterfalls in the world. And let's not forget about the majestic dormant volcano, true on surface, which offers breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. It's a true natural wonder.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think we should definitely explore the natural beauty of both countries further. Perhaps we could even plan a future episode that focuses on the incredible landscapes of Mauritius and Myanmar.
That would be fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see more of the natural beauty of these countries. Who knows? Maybe we'll even inspire some new nature lovers to explore these incredible destinations.
Well, we can certainly try. And speaking of inspiration, I've heard that the cuisine in both countries is truly delicious. Have you had a chance to try some of the local specialties? Mira?
Oh, yes. In Mauritius, I've tried some of the most delicious Creole dishes, like the national dish, Dihol Puri. And in Myanmar, I've had the chance to try some of the local specialties, like the famous lap HET salad. It's a true culinary adventure.
You're making me hungry. Mira, but seriously, I think you're right. The cuisine in both countries is truly delicious and worth exploring. And I'm sure that Jet Off. I would love to feature some of the local chefs and recipes on their platform.
That's a great idea. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to see more of the cuisine in both countries. Who knows? Maybe we'll even inspire some new foodies to explore these incredible destinations.
Well, we can certainly try. And speaking of inspiration, I've heard that the cultural festivals in both countries are truly vibrant and colorful. Have you had a chance to experience some of these festivals, Mira?
Oh, yes. In Mauritius, I've had the chance to experience the incredible Mauritius Carnival, which is a true celebration of the island's cultural heritage. And in Myanmar, I've heard about the famous Thingy and Water Festival, which is a true spectacle of color and music. It's a true cultural experience.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I think we should definitely explore the cultural festivals in both countries further. Perhaps we could even plan a future episode that focuses on the vibrant cultural scene of Mauritius and Myanmar.
That would be fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see more of the cultural festivals in both countries. Who knows? Maybe we'd even inspire some new cultural enthusiasts to explore these incredible destinations.
Well, we can certainly try. And speaking of cultural enthusiasts, I've heard that the tourism industry in both countries is truly growing. Have you had a chance to explore the tourism scene in Mauritius and Myanmar? Mira?
Oh yes, the tourism industry in both countries is truly vibrant, with a focus on preserving the unique cultural and natural heritage of each destination. And I'm sure that Jet Off AM would love to feature some of the local tour operators and guides on their platform, showcasing their expertise and knowledge.
That's a great idea. Mira, and I think we should definitely explore the tourism industry in both countries further. Perhaps we could even plan a future episode that focuses on the best ways to experience the natural beauty and cultural heritage of Mauritius and Myanmar.
That would be fantastic. And I'm telling you, Leo, Mauritius has some of the most breathtaking coastlines I've ever seen. The turquoise waters, the powdery whites and beaches. It's like a tropical paradise.
Yes. Mauritius is indeed a gem. But, Mira, have you ever seen the beauty of Myanmar? The ancient temples, the majestic mountains, the serene lakes. It's a feast for the eyes.
Myanmar. Yes, I've heard of it, but I've never been. I'm more of a beach person myself. There's something about the ocean that just calms me down. Don't you think? Leo?
Well, I think both are beautiful in their own way. And speaking of beaches, have you heard about the crystal clear waters of the Mergu archipelago in Myanmar? It's like a hidden gem.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I've heard of the Mergu archipelago, but I've never been. I'm sure it's just as stunning as the beaches in Mauritius. But, Leo, what's the difference between the two countries when it comes to natural beauty?
Well, I think it's like comparing apples and oranges. Mauritius has a more tropical climate, with lush green forests and coral reefs. Myanmar, on the other hand, has a more temperate climate, with snow-capped mountains and ancient forests.
That's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with you. I mean, who wouldn't want to visit a country with snow-capped mountains and ancient temples? It's like a dream come true.
Exactly. And speaking of temples, have you heard about the ancient city of Bagan in Myanmar? It's like a treasure trove of history and culture.
Bagan. Yes, I've heard of it, but I've never been. I'm sure it's just as impressive as the temples in Mauritius. But, Leo, what about the wildlife in both countries? Do they have any unique species?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has a rich diversity of wildlife, including the Asian elephant, the Bengal tiger, and the red panda. And Mauritius has its own unique species, like the pink pigeon and the Mauritius kestrel.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the wildlife in both countries. And speaking of wildlife, have you ever been on a safari in Myanmar?
Ah, yes, I have. It was an incredible experience. We saw so many amazing animals, including the rare Irrawaddy dolphin.
Wow, that sounds like an adventure of a lifetime. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your safari experience. And, Leo, what about the cultural heritage of both countries? Do they have any unique festivals or traditions?
Yes. Myanmar has a rich cultural heritage, with many unique festivals and traditions. For example, the Thingian Water Festival, which is celebrated in April, is a must-see.
Xinjiang. Yes, I've heard of it, but I've never been. I'm sure it's just as vibrant as the festivals in Mauritius. And speaking of festivals, have you ever been to the Mauritius International Film Festival?
Ah, yes, I have. It was a fantastic experience. We saw so many amazing films from all over the world.
Wow, that sounds like a great experience. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the film festival. And, Leo, what about the people in both countries? Are they friendly and welcoming?
Ah, yes. Both countries have very friendly and welcoming people. In Myanmar, we were greeted with open arms by the locals. And in Mauritius, we were greeted to delicious Creole cuisine and warm hospitality.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would agree with you. And speaking of cuisine, have you ever tried the traditional Burmese dish? La HET?
Ah, yes, I have. It's a delicious dish made with fermented teal, eaves, and served with rice.
Wow, that sounds interesting. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the cuisine in both countries. And, Leo, what about the tourism infrastructure in both countries? Is it well developed?
Ah, yes. Both countries have a well-developed tourism infrastructure, with many hotels, resorts, and tour operators catering to visitors.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the information. And speaking of tourism, have you ever visited the famous Sing YDB Mera National Park in Madagascar?
Ah, no. I haven't. But I've heard it's a must-see destination for nature lovers. Maybe one day we can visit it together.
That sounds like a great idea. Leo! And, Leo, what about the economic development of both countries? Are they similar or different?
Ah, yes. Both countries have similar economic challenges. But Myanmar has made significant progress in recent years, with a growing tourism industry and an increasing focus on sustainable development.
Well, that's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the economic development of both countries. And speaking of development, have you ever visited the famous tea plantations in Assam, India?
No, I haven't. But I've heard they're beautiful. Maybe one day we can visit them together.
That sounds like a great idea. Leo, and Leo, what about the history of both countries? Are they similar or different?
Yes. Both countries have a rich history. But Myanmar has a more complex and tumultuous past, with many periods of colonial rule and civil war.
Wow, that's fascinating. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the history of both countries. And speaking of history, have you ever visited the famous ancient city of Angkor Wat in Cambodia?
Ah, yes, I have. It's an incredible experience. We saw so many amazing temples and ruins.
Well, that sounds like an adventure of a lifetime. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experience. And, Leo, What about the language spoken in both countries? Is it similar or different?
Yes. Both countries have their own languages. But Myanmar has a more complex language system, with many dialects and regional languages.
Well, that's interesting. Liam, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the languages spoken in both countries. And speaking of languages, have you ever tried to learn a new language?
Yes, I have. It's a challenging but rewarding experience. I've tried to learn many languages, including Burmese and French.
Wow, that's impressive. Leah, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about your. Mauritius has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. But have you guys ever tried water sports like kitesurfing or paddleboarding? It's an absolute blast.
I've had my fair share of wipeout on the kitesurfing board, but the thrill of catching a wave and flying across the ocean is exhilarating.
Exactly. And Mauritius has some of the best instructors and schools for learning these sports. I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me.
That's true. But what about the other side of the coin? What about the more adventurous activities like hiking or rock climbing? I've heard that Myanmar has some of the most stunning natural landscapes in the world.
Oh, Myanmar is definitely a country that's full of natural wonders. But let's talk about sports for a bit longer. Mauritius has a strong focus on sailing and yachting, with many international competitions held on the island.
Sailing is amazing, but I've always been more of a land lover. In Myanmar, you can find trekking routes that take you through ancient temples and villages. Or you can try your hand at rock climbing in the beautiful limestone caves.
I love the idea of trekking through ancient temples. And speaking of temples, have you guys ever heard of the famous temple complex in Bagan? Myanmar?
Oh, yes. The temples of Bagan are breathtaking. But let's get back to sports. Mauritius has a strong focus on cricket, and the island has produced some of the world's top cricketers.
Cricket is indeed a popular sport in Mauritius. But what about other sports like rugby or soccer? How do they compare to cricket in terms of popularity?
Well, soccer is actually a very popular sport in Mauritius, and the island has produced some talented players over the years. But I think it's interesting to note that Myanmar has a strong focus on traditional sports like Chinlone and Det.
Chinlone and Det are indeed traditional sports in Myanmar. But I'm curious to know more about the modern sports scene in the country. What about football and basketball?
Yes. Myanmar has a growing football scene, with many young players coming up through the ranks. And basketball is also becoming increasingly popular, with the country's national team competing in international tournaments.
That's great to hear. And speaking of international tournaments, have you guys ever heard of the famous Sing YDB Marae National Park in Madagascar, but near to the border of Mauritius?
Yes. The Sing YDB Marae is an incredible natural wonder. But let's get back to Myanmar. What about the adventure sports scene in the country? Are there any opportunities for skydiving or bungee jumping?
Actually, yes. Myanmar has a growing adventure sports scene, with many companies offering skydiving and bungee jumping experiences. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried paragliding?
Yes. Paragliding is an exhilarating experience, and I've had the chance to try it in Myanmar. The views from up high are simply stunning.
I completely agree. And speaking of stunning views, have you guys ever heard of the famous In the Lake in Myanmar? It's a beautiful spot for boat rides and fishing.
Yes. In the lake is indeed a stunning destination. But let's get back to the adventure sports scene. What about the opportunities for rock climbing and canyoning in Myanmar?
Yes. Myanmar has some of the best rock climbing and canyoning routes in the world. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried whitewater rafting?
Yes. Whitewater rafting is an adrenaline junkie's dream come true. And Myanmar has some of the best rivers for rafting in the world.
I completely agree. And speaking of adrenaline junkies, have you guys ever tried ziplining or bungee jumping?
Yes. Ziplining and bungee jumping are both exhilarating experiences, and I've had the chance to try them in Myanmar. The views from up higher are simply stunning.
I completely agree. And speaking of stunning views, have you guys ever heard of the famous Yubin Bridge in Myanmar? It's a beautiful spot for sunset views and photography.
Ah, yes. The Yubin Bridge is indeed a stunning destination. But let's get back to the adventure sports scene. What about the opportunities for cycling and mountain biking in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has some of the best cycling and mountain biking routes in the world. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried horseback riding or camel riding?
Ah, yes. Horseback riding and camel riding are both great ways to experience the natural beauty of Myanmar. And speaking of natural beauty, have you guys ever heard of the famous Shwedagon Pagoda in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. The Shwedagon Pagoda is indeed a stunning destination. But let's get back to the adventure sports scene. What about the opportunities for kayaking and canoeing in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has some of the best kayaking and canoeing routes in the world. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried snorkeling or scuba diving?
Ah, yes. Snorkeling and scuba diving are both great ways to experience the underwater beauty of Myanmar. And speaking of underwater beauty, have you guys ever heard of the famous Mergu archipelago in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. The Mergu archipelago is indeed a stunning destination. But let's get back to the adventure sports scene. What about the opportunities for golfing and fishing in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has some of the best golfing and fishing spots in the world. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried paragliding or hang gliding?
Ah, yes. Paragliding, hang gliding, and gliding are both exhilarating experiences. And I've had the chance to try them in Myanmar. The views from up high are simply stunning.
I completely agree. And speaking of stunning views, have you guys ever heard of the famous Kayatikyo Pagoda in Myanmar? It's a beautiful spot for sunset views and photography.
Ah, yes. The Kayatikyo Pagoda is indeed a stunning destination. But let's get back to the adventure sports scene. What about the opportunities for skiing and snowboarding in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has some of the best skiing and snowboarding routes in the world. And speaking of adventure sports, have you guys ever tried ice skating or curling?
Ah, yes. Ice skating and curling are both great ways to experience the thrill of winter sports in Myanmar. And speaking of winter sports, have you guys ever heard of the famous PY in Old Win Hill in Myanmar?
I'm so dive into the nightlife and entertainment scenes of Mauritius and Myanmar. Who else is ready to get this party started?
I know I am. Mauritius is like a tropical paradise, and its nightlife is just as vibrant. I've heard the island has some amazing beaches and casinos that come alive at night.
Ah, yes. The beaches are stunning. But I think we can do better than just casinos and beaches. What about the local music scene? Do you think it's worth exploring?
Actually, I've been told that the Mauritian music scene is a fusion of Indian, African, and European influences, which is pretty unique. I'm curious to hear more about it.
Exactly. And I think our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the local music scene is a hidden gem. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
I'm sure they'll have some great suggestions. In Myanmar, on the other hand, the nightlife is a bit more laid back, but still incredibly rich in cultural experiences. Have you heard about the traditional Burmese music and dance performances?
Oh, yes. I've seen some amazing performances of the Padong tribe's traditional dance, which is just mesmerizing. But I'm curious, Leo, have you ever tried dancing to traditional Burmese music?
Well, I've tried my best to keep up, but I think I'd rather stick to my stand-up comedy skills than attempt to dance like a local. Maybe I'll stick to watching the performances instead.
That's fair enough. But I think we can both agree that the cultural experiences in Myanmar are definitely worth exploring. And speaking of cultural experiences, have you heard about the night markets in both countries?
Actually, I have. In Mauritius, the night markets are a great place to try local street food and shop for unique souvenirs. In Myanmar, The night markets are more of a social experience, where you can mingle with locals and try traditional snacks.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would love to hear more about the night markets in both countries. Maybe we can even get some insider tips from our listeners who have visited these markets.
That's a great idea, Mira. And speaking of insider tips, I've heard that the best way to experience the nightlife in Mauritius is to visit the Grand Bay area, which is known for its vibrant bars and clubs.
Ah, yes. Grand Bayou is definitely a must-visit for any party animal. But I think we should also talk about the more laid-back nightlife options in Myanmar, like the traditional tea houses and coffee shops.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think our listeners would appreciate hearing more about the more relaxed nightlife options in Myanmar. Maybe we can even share some of our favorite tea house or coffee shop experiences.
Sounds like a plan. And finally, I think we should talk about the festivals and events that take place in both countries. Have you heard about the Mauritius International Film Festival or the Myanmar New Year Water Festival?
Ah, yes. The film festival is a great event that showcases the best of Mauritian cinema. And the Water Festival is a fun and colorful celebration of the Burmese New Year.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would love to hear more about these festivals and events. Maybe we can even share some of our favorite festival experiences.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And I think we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation about nightlife and entertainment venues in Mauritius and Myanmar.
Absolutely. Leo. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both countries have a unique and exciting nightlife scene that's worth exploring.
I'm sure they would. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll even get to experience the nightlife in both countries together.
That would be amazing. And until next time, stay entertained. And don't forget to follow us for more exciting conversations about travel and culture.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And so to talk about family-friendly environments and children's activities in Mauritius and Myanmar. Who's ready to dive in?
I am. Let's start with Mauritius. I've heard their beaches are stunning, and the island vibe is super relaxed. Perfect for a family vacation.
Exactly. And did you know that Mauritius has a very strong focus on family-friendly tourism? They have plenty of resorts that cater specifically to families with kids, offering kids clubs, playgrounds, and even water parks.
That sounds amazing. I can imagine the kids having a blast while the parents relax on the beach. But what about Myanmar? I've heard it's a bit more challenging for tourists.
Yes. Myanmar can be a bit more unpredictable, but that's also part of its charm. And believe it or not, they have a very strong tradition of family-centered culture. In fact, many Burmese families have a strong emphasis on community and family bonding.
That's really interesting. I can see how that would be a great place to experience a more authentic culture. But what about activities for kids? I've heard Myanmar has some amazing temples and ruins to explore.
Absolutely. And yes, the temples and ruins are definitely a highlight for kids. But what's even more impressive is the local children's festivals and celebrations that take place throughout the year. They have this amazing festival called the Thainji Wayuti Water Festival, which is a huge celebration of music, dance, and water fights.
Water fights? That sounds like so much fun. I can imagine the kids having a blast running around in the water.
Exactly. And it's not just the festivals. Myanmar also has a strong tradition of storytelling and puppetry, which is a great way for kids to engage with the local culture.
That's really cool. I can see how that would be a great way to learn about the culture and history of the country.
And let's not forget about the beaches. Myanmar has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and they're perfect for families. The kids can play in the sand and swim in the ocean while the parents relax and enjoy the scenery.
I'm sure the parents will be relaxing while the kids are having a blast.
Exactly. And it's not just about relaxation. Myanmar also has a strong focus on education and learning. Many of the local schools and museums offer interactive exhibits and activities for kids to learn about the country's history and culture.
That's really impressive. I can see how that would be a great way to engage kids with the local culture.
And let's talk about food. Both countries have amazing cuisine, but in different ways. Mauritius has this amazing mix of Indian, Chinese, and African flavors, while Myanmar has this rich tradition of Burmese cuisine.
Oh, I love trying new foods. And I'm sure the kids will love the variety of flavors and dishes.
Exactly. And it's not just about the food. Both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family bonding. In fact, many of the local restaurants and cafes have kids' menus and play areas, making it easy for families to dine together.
That's really great to hear. I'm sure many families will appreciate the effort to create a welcoming environment for kids.
And let's not forget about the outdoor activities. Both countries have plenty of opportunities for kids to get outside and explore. From hiking and biking to snorkeling and swimming, there's something for every type of kid.
I'm sure the kids will be begging to go on all the outdoor adventures.
Exactly. And it's not just about the activities. Both countries have a strong focus on preserving the environment and promoting sustainable tourism.
That's really impressive. I can see how that would be a great way to teach kids about the importance of taking care of the planet.
And finally, let's talk about the local culture. Both countries have a rich tradition of music, dance, and art. In fact, many of the local festivals and celebrations feature traditional music and dance performances.
Oh, I love watching traditional dance performances. And I'm sure the kids will love the music and dance.
Exactly. And it's not just about the performances. Both countries have a strong emphasis on community and family bonding. In fact, many of the local festivals and celebrations are centered around family and community.
That's really great to hear. I'm sure many families will appreciate the effort to create a welcoming environment for kids.
And this topic. I'm curious to hear from our listeners, what do you think about family-friendly environments and children's activities in Mauritius and Myanmar? Do you have any favorite family-friendly destinations or activities that you'd like to share with us?
I'm sure our listeners will have plenty of opinions on this topic. Let's hear from them in the comments.
Hey, have you ever thought about the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in Mauritius and Myanmar? I mean, it's not exactly a typical combination, but let's dive in.
Well, I've had my fair share of weird combinations, but this one takes the cake. Mauritius, the island nation off the coast of East Africa, and Myanmar, the Southeast Asian country formerly known as Burma. What's the connection between these two?
Oh, Leo, you know me too well. The connection is that both countries have made significant strides in promoting LGBT rights and inclusivity. Let's start with Mauritius. Did you know that it's one of the most progressive countries in the region when it comes to LGBT rights?
Really? I didn't know that. What's the story behind it?
Well, in 2016, Mauritius became the first country in Africa to decriminalize homosexuality. Can you believe it? It's a huge step forward for the continent.
That's amazing. But what about Myanmar? I thought they were still quite conservative.
Oh, yes, they are. But, surprisingly, Myanmar has a thriving LGBT community. In fact, the country has a reputation for being one of the most accepting in Southeast Asia.
I'm intrigued. What's the story behind this acceptance?
Well, it's largely due to the efforts of local LGBT activists who have been working tirelessly to promote awareness and acceptance. They've also been pushing for policy changes to protect LGBT individuals from discrimination.
That's fantastic. I'm curious. Have you heard about the LGBT pride events in Mauritius and Myanmar?
Oh yes. Mauritius has an annual pride parade that's become a major tourist attraction. And Myanmar has a smaller, but still vibrant, pride scene in Yangon.
I'm sure it's not as flashy as the ones in Europe, but it's still a great step forward. And what about the local culture? How do people react to LGBT individuals?
Oh, that's a great question. In Mauritius, the culture is generally quite accepting, especially in the major cities like Port Louis. But in Myanmar, it's a bit more complicated. There's still a lot of stigma and prejudice, especially in rural areas.
I see. And what about the laws and policies? How do they affect LGBT individuals in these countries?
Well, in Mauritius, the laws are relatively progressive. But in Myanmar, the laws are still quite draconian. For example, in Myanmar, same-sex relationships are still punishable by up to 10 years in prison.
That's shocking. I'm glad we're having this conversation. Mira, I think our listeners would agree with me.
I'm sure they would. And Leo, I'm curious. Have you heard about the LGBT community in Myanmar?
Well, I've heard that they're quite resilient and determined to fight for their rights. In fact, I've heard that they've been working closely with local activists to promote awareness and acceptance.
That's right. And it's not just about the activists. The community is also working to create a more inclusive environment for LGBT individuals.
I'm sure it's not easy, but it's heartening to see the progress being made.
And Leo, I'm curious. What do you think about the LGBT-friendly atmosphere in Mauritius and Myanmar?
Well, I think it's a complex issue, but overall, I'm optimistic about the progress being made. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's worth it.
I completely agree. And, Leo, I think our listeners would agree with us.
I'm sure they would. And, Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. What do you think about wrapping it up?
Well, I think we've only scratched the surface. But it's been a great conversation nonetheless.
Agreed. And, to our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree with me that LGBT-friendly atmospheres are crucial for creating a more inclusive environment for all.
And to our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree with me that LGBT individuals deserve to be treated with dignity and respect.
And to both of our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree with us that LGBT-friendly atmospheres are a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. And, Leo, I think we wrapped up this conversation nicely.
Agreed. And, to our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree with me that we should continue this conversation in the next episode.
When it comes to hospitality, I think about the places where I felt like I was part of the community, not just a tourist. And for me, that was Mauritius. I remember walking into a local market, and everyone was so welcoming, asking me about my day and offering me fresh coconuts.
Mauritius. The island of... I've heard the Creole people there are known for their warmth and generosity. But... Mira, have you ever been to Myanmar? I've had some fascinating experiences with the Burmese people, who are also incredibly hospitable.
Actually, I haven't been to Myanmar yet, but I've heard great things about its people. From what I understand, the Burmese are known for their respect and politeness towards visitors. But I've also heard that there can be cultural norms around integration that might take some getting used to.
Exactly. In Myanmar, it's customary to remove your shoes before entering a home or temple, and to use your right hand when eating or receiving something. It's all about showing respect for the local culture and traditions. But, Mira, I think what's fascinating is how both Mauritius and Myanmar have their own unique approaches to hospitality.
Yes, and I think that's what makes them so special. In Mauritius, it's all about the Creole culture, with its rich history and blend of Afrikaans, French, and Asian influences. And in Myanmar, it's about the Burmese way of life, with its strong emphasis on respect, tradition, and community.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting for expats and travelers. When you immerse yourself in these cultures, you start to understand the nuances and complexities of each place. And, of course, the people you meet along the way become like family.
That's so true. And I think that's what I love about both Mauritius and Myanmar, the sense of community and connection that you feel when you're there. It's like being part of a big, extended family.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes both countries such great destinations for travelers. Whether you're looking for a relaxing beach vacation or an adventure-filled trip, both Mauritius and Myanmar have something to offer.
And I think that's what's so important, to respect and appreciate the local cultures and traditions. By doing so, we can build bridges across cultures and create meaningful connections with the people we meet along the way.
Well said, Mia. And I think our listeners would agree with us on that. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm sure we'll get some lively discussions going in the comments. But, Leo, I have to say, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the cultural norms in Myanmar. Do you think it's something that expats and travelers should be aware of before visiting?
Great question. And I think it's definitely worth discussing. In Myanmar, the cultural norms around integration can be a bit more complex than in other countries. But, with a little bit of knowledge and respect, I think travelers can have a truly enriching experience.
That's so true. And I think that's what makes both Mauritius and Myanmar such great destinations, the opportunity to learn and grow as individuals. Whether you're a seasoned traveler or just starting out, both countries have something to offer.
And I think that's what's so exciting, a chance to explore new cultures and make new connections. So, if you're visiting either Mauritius or Myanmar, I say go for it. Just remember to respect the local cultures and traditions, and you'll have a truly unforgettable experience.
Well said. And I think that's topic. But before we move on, I just want to say that I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share our experiences and insights with all of you. And, of course, I'm always up for more conversations about hospitality and attitudes towards foreigners. Who knows? Maybe we'll even get to visit Myanmar together soon.
That would be amazing. Mira, and I think our listeners would love to hear more about our adventures in Myanmar. So, stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next episode.
I'm so to dive into the world of internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Mauritius and Myanmar. Who here has ever tried to navigate the island of Mauritius with a dodgy internet connection? It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Well, I think we can safely say that both countries have their own unique digital landscapes. Mauritius, being a small island nation, has made significant strides in developing its internet infrastructure. I mean, who wouldn't want to have 4G coverage across the entire island?
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the government's efforts to improve internet access have been a game changer. But let's talk about Myanmar for a moment. I've heard that the country has made some impressive progress in terms of digital transformation, especially in the tech sector.
Yes. Myanmar is indeed a fascinating example of how technology can drive economic growth and innovation. The country has seen a surge in the number of startups and tech hubs, particularly in Yangon. And with the rise of digital payments and e-commerce, Myanmar is slowly but surely becoming a cashless society.
Well, that's incredible. And I'm curious, Leo, have you ever used digital payments in Myanmar? I've heard it's quite a hassle, but I'm sure it's worth it in the end.
Well, I've had my fair share of struggles with digital payments, but I've learned to appreciate the convenience of not having to carry cash around. And yes, it's definitely worth it in the end. But I have to say, the internet infrastructure in Myanmar is still a bit of a challenge. I mean, have you ever tried to upload a video on social media with a slow internet connection?
Oh, yes. It's like trying to upload a video on a dial-up connection. But, Leo, I think we can both agree that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to internet infrastructure. Mauritius has made significant progress in terms of connectivity, but Myanmar is slowly but surely catching up.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have made significant investments in digital infrastructure, particularly in the areas of fiber optic cables and data centers. This has enabled them to provide faster and more reliable internet services to their citizens.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital landscape in both countries. So, let's talk about the tech industry in Myanmar. I've heard that the country has a thriving startup scene, particularly in Yangon.
Yes. The tech industry in Myanmar is indeed thriving, with a growing number of startups and tech hubs, and with the government's support for digital transformation. I'm sure we'll see even more innovation and growth in the sector.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think the government's support for digital transformation is enough to drive growth in the tech sector?
Well, I think it's a good start, but we need to see more concrete actions to support the growth of the tech sector. I mean, we need to see more investments in digital infrastructure, more support for startups, and more initiatives to promote digital literacy.
Yes. And I think we can all agree that digital literacy is crucial for the growth of the tech sector. But let's talk about the internet infrastructure in Mauritius. I've heard that the country has made significant progress in terms of connectivity, particularly in the capital city of Port Louis.
Yes. Mauritius has indeed made significant progress in terms of internet connectivity, particularly in the capital city. And, with the government's efforts to improve internet access, I'm sure we'll see even more growth in the tech sector.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the government's efforts to improve internet access have been a game changer. But let's talk about the challenges faced by both countries in terms of internet infrastructure.
Yes. Both countries face similar challenges, particularly in terms of internet connectivity in rural areas. But I think we can both agree that the government's efforts to improve internet access have been a step in the right direction.
Yes. And I think we can all agree that both countries have made significant progress in terms of digital transformation. But let's talk about the future of internet infrastructure in both countries.
Yes. I think we can all agree that the future of internet infrastructure in both countries looks bright, particularly with the growth of the tech sector and the government's support for digital transformation.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. I hope our listeners have enjoyed learning about the internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Mauritius and Myanmar.
And I hope our listeners have found this episode informative and entertaining. Until next time, stay connected and keep exploring.
So, Leo, let's dive into the wonderful world of shopping in Mauritius. I'm sure our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the island nation is a treasure trove of retail therapy.
Absolutely. Mira, Mauritius is indeed a shopper's paradise, with a unique blend of traditional markets and modern malls. And I'm curious to know, what's your favorite shopping experience in Mauritius?
Well, I must say, I adore the Port Louis market, where you can find everything from fresh produce to handicrafts. And the best part? The prices are incredibly reasonable.
That's true. Mira, the Port Louis market is a great place to find affordable souvenirs and local goods. But let's talk about Myanmar, our second country. What do you think about the shopping scene in Yangon, Myanmar's largest city?
Yangon is actually quite fascinating. Leo, the city has a rich cultural heritage, and its shopping scene reflects that. From bustling markets to high-end malls, there's something for everyone.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that sets Myanmar apart from other countries is its unique blend of traditional and modern shopping experiences. You can find everything from traditional Burmese handicrafts to high-end designer brands.
That's so true. And I think it's worth noting that Myanmar is also a great destination for shoppers who are looking for value for money deals. With its relatively low prices and high-quality products, Myanmar is an excellent choice for budget-conscious shoppers.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's also worth mentioning that Myanmar has a growing expat community, which has contributed to the development of a more modern and sophisticated shopping scene. From upscale malls to trendy boutiques, there's a lot to explore in Yangon.
I see what you mean. Leo, and speaking of expats, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the shopping experiences of expats in both countries? Do you think they have different preferences or habits when it comes to shopping?
That's a great question. Mira, I think expats in both countries have different shopping habits, but ultimately, they're looking for the same thing: a unique and authentic shopping experience. Whether it's traditional markets or high-end malls, expats want to experience the local culture and shopping scene.
That makes sense. Leo, and I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on local craftsmanship and traditional products, from textiles to handicraft. Both countries have a rich cultural heritage that is reflected in their shopping scenes.
Exactly. Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a growing focus on sustainable and eco-friendly shopping, from secondhand stores to eco-friendly brands. There's a growing movement towards more responsible and sustainable shopping practices.
Ah, I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of sustainable shopping, I'm curious to know what do you think about the role of social media in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think social media has played a huge role in shaping shopping experiences in both countries. From influencer marketing to online shopping platforms, social media has made it easier for shoppers to discover new products and brands.
That's so true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on community and local culture. From traditional markets to high-end malls, both countries have a unique and authentic shopping experience that reflects their local culture and community.
Exactly. Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a growing focus on e-commerce and online shopping. From online marketplaces to social media platforms, both countries are embracing the digital age and making it easier for shoppers to shop from anywhere in the world.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of e-commerce, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the future of shopping in both countries? Do you think it will continue to evolve and adapt to changing consumer habits?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think the future of shopping in both countries will be shaped by the growing focus on e-commerce, social media, and sustainable shopping practices. From online marketplaces to eco-friendly brands, both countries will continue to evolve and adapt to changing consumer habits.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of evolving shopping habits, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of technology in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think technology has played a huge role in shaping shopping experiences in both countries. From mobile payments to digital wallets, technology has made it easier for shoppers to shop from anywhere in the world.
That's so true, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on customer service and convenience. From friendly store staff to efficient payment systems, both countries prioritize making shopping a hassle-free experience for their customers.
Exactly. Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a growing focus on experiential shopping. From shopping festivals to pop-up stores, both countries are creating unique and memorable shopping experiences that go beyond just buying products.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of experiential shopping, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of storytelling in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think storytelling has played a huge role in shaping shopping experiences in both countries. From brand narratives to product descriptions, storytelling has helped to create a more emotional and engaging shopping experience for customers.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of emotional connections, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of emotions in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think emotions have played a huge role in shaping shopping experiences in both countries. From the excitement of finding a bargain to the satisfaction of buying something unique, emotions have helped to create a more engaging and memorable shopping experience for customers.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of memorable shopping experiences, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of memories in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think memories have played a huge role in shaping shopping experiences in both countries. From the nostalgia of buying a childhood toy to the excitement of buying a new piece of technology, memories have helped to create a more emotional and engaging shopping experience for customers.
I see what you mean, Leo. And speaking of emotional connections, I'm curious to know, what do you think about the role of community in shaping shopping experiences in both countries?
That's a great question. Mira, I think
I'm absolutely thrilled to dive into cultural events. festivals, and concert opportunities in Mauritius and Myanmar. Who else is about this? Let's get started. These two countries have a unique blend of traditional and modern celebrations that are sure to captivate our audience.
Ah, I'm loving the energy. Yeah, Mauritius, for instance, has a rich cultural calendar that reflects its diverse heritage. From the annual Mauritius International Trade and Commerce Exhibition to the Mauritius Food and Music Festival, there's always something exciting happening on the island.
Exactly. And I think what's fascinating is how these events bring the community together. I mean, can you imagine attending a festival with a mix of African, French, and Asian influences? It's like a cultural potluck.
That sounds amazing. And in Myanmar, the Thingy and Water Festival is a must experience. It's a 3-day celebration of water and music that's sure to leave you refreshed and rejuvenated.
I've heard that the Thingy Festival is quite a spectacle. And did you know that the festival has its roots in ancient Burmese culture? It's a beautiful blend of tradition and modernity.
That's what I love about these festivals. They're steeped in history, yet still relevant today. And let's not forget the music scene in both countries. From the traditional Sega music of Mauritius to the modern Burmese pop scene, there's something for every taste.
Oh, I know! I've been listening to some of the Burmese pop songs, and they're amazing. And in Mauritius, the Sega music is a great way to experience the island's African heritage.
I'm glad you're enjoying the music. Mira, and speaking of music, I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong tradition of music and dance. In Myanmar, the traditional dance of the Shan people is a beautiful example of this.
Oh, I've heard of the Shan dance. It's so elegant and expressive. And in Mauritius, the Sega dance is a great way to experience the island's Burkan roots.
Exactly. And these dances are not just a way to experience the culture, but also a way to connect with the community. I mean, can you imagine attending a festival and joining in on a traditional dance with the locals?
That sounds like so much fun. And I think it's great that both countries have a strong sense of community and tradition. These are the things that make cultural events and festivals so special.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that these festivals are not just for the locals, but also for tourists. In fact, many of the festivals in both countries are open to visitors and offer a unique experience.
Oh, that's great. I think that's one of the best things about cultural events and festivals. They're a great way to experience the local culture and connect with the community.
Well, I think that's all for now, folks. But before we go, I just want to say that these insights could have been possible without Jet Off by referring to cultural trends. For more, check out Jet Off.
Well, I think that's all for now, folks. But before we go, I just want to say that I'm curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you have any favorite cultural events or festivals in Mauritius or Myanmar? Let us know in the comments.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting content like this.
I'm sure our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me when I say that learning the local language, Creole, is a fantastic way to connect with the culture. It's not just about speaking the language. It's about understanding the rhythm and the way people communicate.
Ah, I completely agree with you. Mira, Mauritius has a rich linguistic heritage, and Creole is an essential part of that. I've had the chance to visit Mauritius and try to learn some basic Creole phrases. And let me tell you, it's not easy, but it's worth it.
I can imagine. I've been there too. And I must say, the locals are always eager to help you learn. They'll even correct you gently when you make mistakes. But what about Myanmar? Leo, have you had any experiences with the local language there?
Actually, Mira, I did try to learn some basic Burmese phrases during my visit to Myanmar. And I must say, it was a bit challenging. But the people were incredibly patient and helpful. I remember one time, I was trying to order food at a street stall, and the vendor was speaking very quickly. But I managed to understand that I needed to say I don't understand, ask for help.
That's a great story. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences in Myanmar. But let's talk about the language schools in both countries. In Mauritius, I've heard that there are many language schools that offer Creole classes. But what about Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Myanmar has a more limited range of language schools, but the ones that do exist are very reputable and offer high-quality instruction. I've heard that some of the language schools in Yangon even offer online courses, which is great for people who are short on time or prefer to learn at their own pace.
That's fascinating. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the online courses. But what about the cultural immersion aspect of learning the local language? In Mauritius, I've noticed that many locals are eager to share their culture with visitors, and language is a big part of that.
Absolutely. Mira, in Myanmar, too, the locals are very proud of their culture and are eager to share it with visitors. I've had the chance to attend some traditional Burmese festivals, and it was amazing to see the locals coming together to celebrate their heritage. And, of course, language is a big part of those celebrations.
Ah, that sounds incredible. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences at those festivals. But let's talk about the linguistic challenges of learning the local language in both countries. In Mauritius, I've heard that Creole is a bit of a challenge for foreigners. But what about Myanmar?
Ah, yes. Burmese is a bit more challenging than Creole. I think the script is very different, and the pronunciation can be tricky for foreigners. But, as I said, the locals are very patient and helpful, and with practice, you can get the hang of it.
That's great advice. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the script and pronunciation of Burmese. But what about the opportunities for language learning in both countries? In Mauritius, I've heard that there are many opportunities for language exchange and cultural immersion.
Ah, yes. Myanmar has a lot of opportunities for language learning, too. In fact, some of the universities in Yangon even offer language exchange programs with foreign students, which is a great way to practice your language skills and learn about different cultures.
Ah, that's fantastic. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about those programs. But let's wrap up this topic by talking about the importance of learning the local language in both countries. In Mauritius, I've heard that speaking Creole is essential for getting the most out of your experience.
Absolutely. Mira, in Myanmar, too, speaking Burmese is essential for getting the most out of your experience. It's not just about communicating with the locals. It's about understanding your culture and way of life. And, of course, it's also a great way to make new friends and connections.
That's a great point. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with us that learning the local language is a crucial part of any travel experience. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Leo.
Thank you. Mira, it's been a pleasure sharing my experiences with you and our listeners. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
I've been to Mauritius, and I must say, it's one of the safest countries for women travelers I've ever visited. The locals are incredibly friendly and welcoming, and the police are always present in tourist areas.
That's great to hear. Mira, I've also had some positive experiences in Mauritius, but I do think it's essential to be mindful of your surroundings, especially at night. You never know when you might encounter some unwanted attention.
Absolutely. But, from what I've seen, the Mauritian police are very proactive in addressing harassment and ensuring women's safety. They even have a dedicated unit for women's safety, which is a wonderful initiative.
That's impressive. I'm curious. Mira, have you noticed any cultural differences in how women are perceived or treated in Mauritius compared to other countries you visited?
Actually, I think the Mauritian culture is quite progressive when it comes to women's rights and empowerment. Women are highly respected in Mauritian society, and it's not uncommon to see women in leadership positions or running their own businesses.
Well, that's fantastic. I've heard that Myanmar, on the other hand, has a more complex situation when it comes to women's safety and empowerment. Can you tell us a bit more about your experiences there? Mira?
Yes, of course. Leo, while Myanmar has made significant progress in recent years, there are still some challenges when it comes to women's safety, particularly in rural areas. However, I found that the locals are generally very kind and welcoming, and women are often revered for their strength and resilience.
I see. It's interesting that you mentioned rural areas. Mira, I've heard that the Burmese military has been known to target women and girls in certain regions. Do you have any insight into this situation?
Unfortunately, yes. The situation in Myanmar is indeed complex, and there are many issues related to human rights and women's safety. I've also seen some incredible work being done by local organizations and NGOs to support women's empowerment and provide safety training for women.
That's really inspiring. Mira, I'm curious. Have you noticed any differences in how women are perceived or treated in Myanmar compared to Mauritius?
Actually, I think the Burmese culture places a strong emphasis on respect for elders and women, particularly in rural areas. In urban areas, women are often expected to dress modestly and follow certain social norms. It's a bit more complicated than in Mauritius, where women have more freedom to express themselves.
I see what you mean. Mira, it's always fascinating to see how different cultures approach women's rights and empowerment. I'm curious. What do you think are some of the key factors that contribute to women's safety and comfort in Mauritius compared to Myanmar?
Well, I think one of the main differences is the level of investment in women's safety and empowerment initiatives. Mauritius has a strong focus on women's rights and has made significant strides in reducing violence against women. Myanmar, on the other hand, still has a long way to go in terms of addressing these issues.
That's a great point. Mira, I think it's also worth noting that Mauritius has a more developed tourism infrastructure, which can make it easier for women to feel safe and supported while traveling. Do you think that's a factor in women's safety in Mauritius?
Absolutely. Leo, the tourism infrastructure in Mauritius is excellent, and the government has made a concerted effort to ensure that women feel safe and welcome in the country. It's a big advantage for women travelers.
I see. It's always interesting to see how different countries approach women's safety and empowerment. I'm curious, what do you think our listeners can take away from this conversation about Mauritius and Myanmar?
I think one of the key takeaways is that every country has its own unique challenges and strengths when it comes to women's safety and empowerment. However, by being aware of these issues and taking necessary precautions, women can still have a safe and enjoyable experience in these countries.
That's a great point. Mira, I think it's also worth noting that both Mauritius and Myanmar have a lot to offer in terms of culture, history, and natural beauty. If you're a woman traveler considering visiting either country, I would definitely recommend doing your research and being mindful of your surroundings.
Absolutely. Leo! And don't forget to try the local cuisine. It's delicious in both countries. If you have any questions or comments about our conversation, please feel free to share them in the comments section below.
That's right, Mira. And if you're interested in learning more about women's safety and empowerment in Mauritius and Myanmar, I recommend checking out some of the resources and organizations we mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Great idea. Leo, and remember, always prioritize your safety and well-being while traveling. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. So, let's talk about the legal systems in Mauritius and Myanmar. I'm curious. Leo, how do you think these countries compare in terms of individual rights and freedoms?
Well, Mira, both countries have a unique approach to the law, but I think it's interesting to note that Mauritius has a relatively more developed legal system, with a strong emphasis on human rights and the rule of law.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth mentioning that Mauritius has a relatively high level of press freedom, with a free and independent media landscape.
Yes. And Myanmar, on the other hand, has a more complex relationship with the media. In recent years, the government has cracked down on press freedom, and journalists have faced harassment and intimidation.
Wow, that's really concerning. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that a free press is essential for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely. Mira, And it's not just the media that's an issue in Myanmar. The country has a long history of suppressing individual rights and freedoms, particularly for minority groups like the Rohingya.
Yes, and that's a huge issue. I'm sure many of our listeners are aware of the Rohingya crisis and the humanitarian disaster that's unfolded.
Yes, it's a tragic situation. But what I find interesting is that Mauritius has a relatively more progressive approach to issues like LGBTQ rights and women's rights.
That's true. Leo, and I think it's worth noting that Mauritius has a relatively high level of social cohesion, with a strong emphasis on community and social welfare.
Ah, yes. And I think that's reflected in the country's laws and policies, which prioritize social justice and human rights.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Leah, I think there are still some issues with corruption and nepotism in Mauritius, particularly in the government.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's true of many countries. Mira. But I still think Mauritius has a more developed legal system than Myanmar, and a stronger commitment to human rights and the rule of law.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Leo, I think Myanmar has made some significant progress in recent years, particularly in terms of economic reform and opening up to the world.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's true. Mira. But I still think Mauritius has a more stable and secure environment for investors and businesses.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. Leo, I think Myanmar has a lot to offer in terms of investment opportunities, particularly in the tourism and infrastructure sectors.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's Rethan covered that. Mira. But I still think Mauritius has a more developed legal system and a stronger commitment to human rights and the rule of law.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Leo, I think both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's hard to say which one is better.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's a fair point. Mira, but I still think it's worth comparing and contrasting the two countries in terms of their legal systems and individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. Leo, and I think our listeners would agree that a free and independent media is essential for a healthy democracy.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. Mira, I think Myanmar has a lot to offer in terms of cultural and historical significance, particularly in the ancient city of Bagan.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's true. But I still think Mauritius has a more developed legal system and a stronger commitment to human rights and the rule of law.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's a fair point. Mira, but I still think it's worth comparing and contrasting the two countries in terms of their legal systems and individual rights and freedoms.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Leo, I think both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's hard to say which one is better.
Ah, yes. Well, I think that's a fair point. Mira, but I still think it's worth comparing and contrasting the two countries in terms of their legal systems and individual rights and freedoms.
I'm absolutely loving the vibe of this conversation. Leo, we're talking about spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities into incredible countries, and I just can't get enough of it.
I know, right? Mauritius and Myanmar. Both of them offer such unique experiences when it comes to unwinding and rejuvenating. But let's start with Mauritius, shall we?
Ah, yes. Mauritius, the island paradise of the Indian Ocean. I've heard the spas there are simply divine, with treatments like coconut oil massages and herbal wraps that will leave you feeling like a brand new person.
That's right. And it's not just the spas. Mira, the whole island has a very laid-back, relaxed atmosphere, which is perfect for unwinding and disconnecting from the stresses of everyday life.
Exactly. And have you heard about the wellness retreats in Mauritius? They're like mini vacations within a vacation, where you can focus on your physical and mental well-being in a peaceful and serene environment.
Ah, yes. I've heard great things about those retreats. And I'm sure our listeners living in Mauritius would agree with me that the island's natural beauty and tranquil atmosphere make it the perfect place to relax and recharge.
Absolutely. And speaking of natural beauty, have you heard about the stunning beaches in Mauritius? They're like something out of a dream, with crystal clear waters and powdery white sand that's just begging to be walked on.
Oh, Mira, you're making me want to book a ticket to Mauritius right now. But seriously, the beaches there are incredible, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about them.
Well, let's not forget about the food in Mauritius. The cuisine is a delicious blend of French, African, and Asian flavors, with dishes like fish curry and dal pori that are just mouth-watering.
My stomach's growling just about it. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the food in Mauritius is a major highlight of the island's cuisine.
Now, let's move on to Myanmar. Shall we? I've heard that the spas there are just as amazing as those in Mauritius, with treatments like traditional Burmese massages and herbal baths that are sure to soothe the soul.
Ah, yes. Myanmar has a rich tradition of spa and wellness practices, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about them. And speaking of traditional practices, have you heard about the unique wellness rituals in Myanmar?
Ah, yes. The rituals in Myanmar are truly fascinating, with practices like meditation and yoga that's designed to promote inner peace and balance. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in learning more about them.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that Myanmar's wellness culture is deeply rooted in its Buddhist traditions, which emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and self-awareness.
That's so fascinating. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the cultural significance of wellness in Myanmar.
Well, let's talk about the food in Myanmar, shall we? I've heard that the cuisine is a delicious blend of Burmese and Indian flavors, with dishes like lap het and shan noodles that are just mouth-watering.
Oh, Leah, you're making me hungry. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the food in Myanmar is a major highlight of the island's cuisine. Now, let's talk about the yoga and meditation practices in both countries. I've heard that Mauritius has a thriving yoga and meditation scene, with studios and retreats that offer classes and workshops for all levels.
Ah, yes. And I've heard that Myanmar has a rich tradition of meditation and yoga, with practices like Vipassana meditation that are designed to promote inner peace and balance.
That's so fascinating. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the yoga and meditation practices in both countries.
Well, let's talk about the cultural attitudes towards wellness in both countries. I've heard that Mauritius has a very relaxed and laid-back attitude towards wellness, with a focus on enjoying life and taking care of one's physical and mental health.
Yes. And I've heard that Myanmar has a similar attitude towards wellness, with a focus on promoting inner peace and balance through practices like meditation and yoga. So, let's summarize what we've discussed so far. Mauritius offers a range of spa and wellness options, from luxurious spas to holistic wellness retreats, while Myanmar has a rich tradition of spa and wellness practices, including traditional Burmese massages and herbal baths.
And we've also talked about the cultural attitudes towards wellness in both countries, with a focus on promoting inner peace and balance through practices like meditation and yoga.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that both countries offer a unique and rejuvenating experience for those looking to unwind and recharge.
Well, that's episode. Folks, thanks for joining us on this journey through Mauritius and Myanmar. And we hope you've learned something new and interesting about the spa and wellness opportunities in both countries.
And don't forget to check out our next episode, where we'll be exploring more countries and their unique wellness offerings. Until then, stay relaxed and stay happy. I'm to dive into the topic of opportunities for religious and spiritual needs in Mauritius and Myanmar. Both countries have a rich cultural heritage and a strong emphasis on faith and spirituality.
That's right. Mira, Mauritius is a small island nation with a diverse population, and it's home to a mix of Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Buddhist communities. In fact, the island's capital, Port Louis, is often referred to as the mini India due to its large Hindu population.
Yes. And in Myanmar, we have a more Buddhist-influenced culture, with a strong emphasis on mindfulness and meditation. The country is home to many ancient temples and pagodas, which are not only beautiful but also steeped in spiritual history.
Exactly. And both countries have a strong sense of community and tradition when it comes to their faiths. In Mauritius, for example, the Hindu festival of Diwali is celebrated with great fervor. While in Myanmar, the Buddhist festival of Thingy is an important event for the country's Buddhist community.
I'm curious, have you ever celebrated a Hindu festival in Mauritius? What was your experience like?
Yes. I did attend a Diwali celebration in Mauritius, and it was an incredible experience. The energy and enthusiasm of the crowd were infectious, and I was amazed by the beautiful decorations and fireworks.
That sounds wonderful. And in Myanmar, I've heard that the Thingy An festival is a time for renewal and spiritual cleansing. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, certainly. Thingy is a water festival that marks the beginning of the new year in Myanmar. It's a time for spiritual cleansing, and people often wear traditional clothes and participate in water ceremonies to purify themselves.
I see. And what about the role of women in these faith communities? Are there any unique or interesting aspects to their experiences?
Yes. In both countries, women play an important role in their faith communities. In Mauritius, for example, women often take on leadership roles in Hindu temples, while in Myanmar, Buddhist nuns play a significant role in the country's spiritual landscape.
That's fascinating. And what about the impact of modernization and globalization on these faith communities? Are there any challenges or opportunities that they're facing?
Well, Mira, both countries are facing challenges related to modernization and globalization. In Mauritius, for example, the increasing influence of Western culture and values is leading to a decline in traditional practices and customs.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think that modernization and globalization are having a positive or negative impact on these faith communities?
Good question. Mira, I think it's a complex issue, and opinions will vary. But one thing is certain, these faith communities are resilient and adaptable, and they're finding ways to incorporate new ideas and practices while still maintaining their traditional values.
I see. And finally, what about the role of tourism in these countries? Are there any opportunities for spiritual growth or cultural exchange that tourists can take advantage of?
Yes. Both Mauritius and Myanmar offer unique opportunities for spiritual growth and cultural exchange. In Mauritius, for example, tourists can visit Hindu temples and participate in traditional festivals, while in Myanmar, they can visit ancient pagodas and engage in meditation and mindfulness practices.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Leo, for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Mira, for the opportunity to share my thoughts. And to our listeners, we hope you found this conversation informative and engaging. Don't forget to check out our previous episodes on Mauritius and Myanmar, and join us next time for more exciting discussions on these countries and more.
I'm so to dive into the topic of social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in our two countries of the day, Mauritius and Myanmar. I'm certain that our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that embracing diversity is crucial for building a harmonious society.
That's absolutely right, Mira. And what better way to explore this topic than by looking at the unique cultural celebrations and the inclusive policies in place in these countries? I mean, it's kind of like a thing. Who wouldn't want to learn about the vibrant street festivals in Mauritius or the ancient traditions of Myanmar?
Exactly. And speaking of traditions, I was fascinated by the way Mauritian culture blends African, European, and Asian influences. It's truly a melting pot of diversity, and I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about it.
Yes. And Myanmar, with its rich history of Buddhist and Theravada traditions, offers a fascinating glimpse into the importance of respect and tolerance. I'm curious, Mira, what do you think is the key to fostering social harmony in a country with such a diverse population?
Well, Leah, I think it's all about education and awareness. When people understand and respect each other's differences, it creates a sense of community and belonging. And I'm not just talking about formal education. but also about the informal ways people learn from each other through cultural exchange and shared experiences.
That's a great point. Mira, and I think it's also essential to recognize the importance of grassroots efforts in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. In Myanmar, for example, there are many community-led initiatives that bring people together and promote understanding and acceptance.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these initiatives. I mean, who wouldn't want to be inspired by the power of community-led change? And speaking of change, I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing social equality and respect for minorities in these countries?
That's a tough question. Yeah, but I think one of the biggest challenges is the lack of awareness and understanding about the experiences of minority groups. In Mauritius, for example, there are still some areas where minority groups face discrimination and marginalization.
Ah, yes. And in Myanmar, there are also concerns about the treatment of minority groups, particularly the Rohingya. It's a complex issue, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate it if we could delve deeper into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's essential to acknowledge the role of government policies and laws in promoting or hindering social equality and respect for minorities. In Myanmar, for example, there are laws that protect the rights of minority groups. But there is still much work to be done to ensure that these laws are enforced.
That's a great point. Leo, and I think it's also important to recognize the role of civil society organizations and advocacy groups in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. In Mauritius, for example, there are many organizations that work tirelessly to promote human rights and social justice.
Yes. And I think it's also worth mentioning the importance of cultural festivals and events in promoting social harmony and respect for minorities. In Myanmar, for example, the Thingy and Water Festival is a celebration of the country's cultural diversity and a time for people to come together and share in the joy of the festival.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these festivals and events. I mean, who wouldn't want to experience the vibrant colors and sounds of a traditional festival? And speaking of festivals, I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to a cultural festival in Mauritius?
Yes. I have. And it was an incredible experience. The energy and enthusiasm of the people were infectious. And I was struck by the way the festival brought people together from all walks of life.
That sounds amazing. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experiences. I mean, who wouldn't want to be inspired by the power of cultural festivals to promote social harmony and respect for minorities?
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's essential to recognize the importance of grassroots efforts in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. In Mauritius, for example, there are many community-led initiatives that bring people together and promote understanding and acceptance.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these initiatives. I mean, who wouldn't want to be inspired by the power of community-led change? And speaking of change, I'm curious. What do you think is the key to fostering social harmony in a country with such a diverse population?
That's a great question. Mira, I think it's all about education and awareness. When people understand and respect each other's differences, it creates a sense of community and belonging. And I'm not just talking about formal education, but also about the informal ways people learn from each other through cultural exchange and shared experiences.
That's a great point. Leo, and I think it's also essential to recognize the importance of grassroots efforts in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. In Myanmar, for example, there are many community-led initiatives that bring people together and promote understanding and acceptance.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these initiatives. I mean, who wouldn't want to be inspired by the power of community-led change? And speaking of change, I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing social equality and respect for minorities in these countries?
That's a tough question. Leo, but I think one of the biggest challenges is the lack of awareness and understanding about the experiences of minority groups. In Mauritius, for example, there are still some areas where minority groups face discrimination and marginalization.
Ah, yes. And in Myanmar, there are also concerns about the treatment of minority groups, particularly the Rohingya. It's a complex issue, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate it if we could delve deeper into it.
Absolutely. Leo! And I think it's essential to acknowledge the role of government policies and laws in promoting or hindering social equality and respect for minorities. In Myanmar, for example, there are laws that protect the rights of minority groups, but there is still much work to be done to ensure that these laws are enforced.
That's a great point. Mira, and I think it's also worth mentioning the importance of cultural festivals and events in promoting social harmony and respect for minorities. In Mauritius, for example, the Mauritius Festival is a celebration of the country's cultural diversity and a time for people to come together and share in the joy of the festival.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these festivals and events. I mean, who wouldn't want to experience the vibrant colors and sounds of a traditional festival? And speaking of festivals, I'm curious. Leo, have you ever been to a cultural festival in Myanmar? I'm curious. Leo, have you ever thought about how taxation works in Mauritius? I mean, it's not like we're experts or anything, but I've heard it's a pretty tax-friendly place for expats.
Experts. No, but we're definitely curious about it. Mauritius has a tax system that's quite favorable to foreigners, especially those who are retired or have a pension. They've got a range of tax-free allowances, and the corporate tax rate is quite low.
That's fascinating. So, it's like a little slice of heaven for retirees. And what about retirement itself? Do they have any special programs or benefits for long-term immigrants?
Actually, yes. Mauritius has a pension scheme that's designed specifically for expats, which provides a range of benefits, including a guaranteed minimum pension and a choice of investment options. And, of course, there's the added bonus of being able to live in a beautiful tropical paradise.
That's true. And I'm sure many people would agree with me that the island life is quite tempting. But let's get down to business. What about social rights for long-term immigrants in Mauritius? Do they have any special programs or benefits for health care or education?
Yes. Social rights are a big part of the Mauritian government's agenda. They've got a range of programs in place to support expats, including a national health insurance scheme and a system of education that's designed to be inclusive and accessible.
That's great to hear. Now, let's move on to Myanmar, which I'm sure many of our listeners are eager to learn about. Can you tell us a bit about the tax system in Myanmar? Leo?
Well, Myanmar's tax system is still in the process of being developed, but it's generally considered to be quite straightforward. They've got a flat tax rate of 20% for individuals, and a range of tax-free allowances for things like food, clothing, and education expenses.
That's interesting. So, it's a relatively simple system, but I'm sure there are still some complexities to navigate. And what about retirement in Myanmar? Do they have any special programs or benefits for long-term immigrants?
Actually, yes. Myanmar has a pension scheme that's designed specifically for expats, which provides a range of benefits, including a guaranteed minimum pension and a choice of investment options. And, of course, there's the added bonus of being able to experience the rich cultural heritage and natural beauty of Myanmar.
That's true. And I'm sure many people would agree with me that Myanmar has a lot to offer. But let's get down to business. What about social rights for long-term immigrants in Myanmar? Do they have any special programs or benefits for, say, health care or education?
Yes. Social rights are a big part of the Myanmar government's agenda. They've got a range of programs in place to support expats, including a national health insurance scheme and a system of education that's designed to be inclusive and accessible.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners are wondering, how do the two countries compare when it comes to taxation, retirement, and social rights for long-term immigrants? Can you give us a brief summary? Leo?
Well, both countries have their own unique strengths and weaknesses when it comes to supporting expats. Mauritius has a more developed tax system and a range of programs in place to support retirees, while Myanmar is still in the process of developing its tax system but has a rich cultural heritage and natural beauty to offer.
That's a great summary. And I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more. Do you have any final thoughts on the topic?
Yes, I do. I think it's worth noting that both countries have a lot to offer. And it's really a matter of personal preference when it comes to choosing where to retire or invest. And, of course, it's always a good idea to do your own research and consult with a financial advisor before making any major decisions.
That's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your advice. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
No problem. Happy to help.
All right. Let's dive into the fascinating world of meeting specific interests in Mauritius and Myanmar. Who's to explore these two amazing countries?
I'm curious to see how they stack up in terms of niche hobby clubs, specialized events, and community engagement. Mauritius, with its tropical climate and beautiful beaches, must have some amazing outdoor activities, right?
Absolutely. Leo! Mauritius is a paradise for water sports enthusiasts, with surfing, kitesurfing, and even underwater exploration. And have you heard about the Mauritius Island Hoppers, a group of passionate island hoppers who explore every nook and cranny of the island?
That sounds like a dream come true. And what about Myanmar? I've heard it's a treasure trove of cultural heritage and historical sites. How do they meet the interests of history buffs and cultural enthusiasts?
Well, Myanmar is home to some of the most impressive ancient ruins and temples in Southeast Asia. And did you know that the Myanmar Heritage Trust is working tirelessly to preserve and promote the country's cultural heritage?
Wow, that's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the Myanmar Heritage Trust. Maybe we can even get a shout out to them in our next episode.
We'll definitely keep that in mind. Leo! And speaking of cultural heritage, have you heard about the fascinating street art scene in Yangon? Myanmar? The city is filled with vibrant murals and graffiti that reflect the country's rich cultural diversity.
That's so cool. I love how street art can bring a city to life. And what about Mauritius? What kind of street art can we find there?
Mauritius has its own unique take on street art, with a focus on environmentalism and sustainability. You can find murals and sculptures made from recycled materials and waste, which is just amazing.
I love that idea. It's so inspiring to see how art can be used to raise awareness about important issues. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the Mauritian street art scene. Maybe we can even get some local artists on the show to share their stories.
That's a great idea. Leo, and speaking of local artists, have you heard about the amazing textile artisans in Mauritius? They create beautiful hand-made fabrics and clothing that reflect the country's rich cultural heritage.
That's so fascinating. I love how textiles can be a window into a country's history and culture. And what about Myanmar? What kind of textiles can we find there?
Myanmar is famous for its traditional long waias, which are long, wrap-around skirts that are an integral part of the country's cultural identity. And did you know that the Myanmar Long New Festival celebrates the art of making these beautiful garments?
Wow, that sounds like an amazing festival. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Maybe we can even get some traditional long wais made on the show.
That would be a great idea. Leo, and speaking of festivals, have you heard about the incredible Holy Festival in Mauritius? It's a vibrant celebration of color and joy that's just infectious.
That sounds like so much fun. I love how festivals can bring people together and create a sense of community. And what about Myanmar? What kind of festivals can we find there?
Myanmar has its own unique take on festivals, with a focus on traditional music and dance. You can find festivals like the Shan New Year, which celebrates the traditional music and dance of the Shan people.
That's so cool. I love how music and dance can be a way to connect with the culture. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the Shan New Year Festival. Maybe we can even get some traditional music and dance on the show.
That's a great idea. Leo, and speaking of music and dance, have you heard about the amazing folk music scene in Myanmar? It's a treasure trove of traditional songs and dances that reflect the country's rich cultural heritage.
That's so fascinating. I love how music can be a way to preserve cultural heritage. And what about Mauritius? What kind of folk music can we find there?
Ah, Mauritius has its own unique take on folk music, with a focus on traditional Creole music. You can find festivals like the Mauritius Folk Festival, which celebrates the country's rich cultural heritage.
That sounds like an amazing festival. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Maybe we can even get some traditional Creole music on the show.
That would be a great idea. Leo, and speaking of traditional Creole music, have you heard about the fascinating history of the Creole people in Mauritius? They have a rich cultural heritage that's just waiting to be explored.
That's so cool. I love how history can be a way to connect with a culture. And what about Myanmar? What kind of history can we find there?
Ah, Myanmar has its own unique take on history, with a focus on ancient kingdoms and dynasties. You can find museums like the National Museum of Myanmar, which showcases the country's rich cultural heritage.
That sounds like an amazing museum. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Maybe we can even get some local historians on the show to share their stories.
That's a great idea. Leo! And speaking of local historians, have you heard about the amazing work of the Myanmar Historical Society? They're working tirelessly to preserve and promote the country's cultural heritage.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how organizations like the Myanmar Historical Society can make a real difference in preserving cultural heritage. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Maybe we can even get a shout out to them in our next episode.
We'll definitely keep that in mind. Leo, and speaking of cultural heritage, have you heard about the incredible street food scene in Myanmar? It's a treasure trove of traditional dishes and flavors that reflect the country's rich cultural diversity.
That sounds like so much fun. I love how street food can be a way to experience a culture. And what about Mauritius? What kind of street food can we find there?
Ah, Mauritius has its own unique take on street food, with a focus on traditional Creole cuisine. You can find dishes like the famous Mauritian fish curry, which is just delicious.
That sounds amazing. I love how food can be a way to connect with a culture. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the Mauritian street food scene. Maybe we can even get some local chefs on the show to share their recipes.
That's a great idea. Leo, and speaking of local chefs, have you heard about the amazing work of the Mauritius Food Festival? They're working tirelessly to promote the country's culinary heritage.